Chapter 36. A New World. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Carving the final lines of runic text on the towering stone archway, Lux stood back as the formerly dull and boring veil of death transformed into something more fitting of his style than the simple stone structure that it originally was. Now looking at the golden pearly gates leading to a new dimension, he could barely hold himself back from rushing through the portal on his own. After all, Lux had a good idea of what kinds of beauties waited on the other side. But no, he'd hold back, for now. Mainly because he was sure that Rose would get pissy if he wrought chaos upon the weird crossover world that she was born in without her. He knew his corrupted protagonist had more than a few grudges that she wanted to handle herself. It was probably for the best, he decided. While waiting for Bella and Rose to ready themselves, he could finally take the time to go on a shopping spree with all the essence he'd saved up from his actions on Planetos. Lux wouldn't fool himself into believing that he stood a chance against the top dogs of the DxD-verse as he was now. And even after creating the upgrades he had planned, the strongest of the world were still guaranteed to wipe the floor with him. Now, Lux had enough self-awareness to realize that he wouldn't be able to stop himself from ruffling more than a few feathers of the various powers at play. So, his primary goal right now was to make sure that dealing with him would be far too much trouble to be worth it, and that was something he was sure was within his budget. Even as he was now, considering he was a god from a much, much, scarier universe than Titty Land, Lux didn't believe there was anything there that could truly kill him. But the setback that would come along with having to reform himself from nothing was the last thing he wanted to experience so soon into this new life of his. And to make sure that wasn't the case, he'd already decided that his first expense would be to upgrade the ability that had already served him so well up to this point already. Drawing on his essence of creation, the powers he'd not felt since his first day arriving in this world flowed through his being, transforming the bastardized version of the Archmage that he'd been working with into what it was truly meant to be. Essence of the Archmage. Perfect memory with infinite storage. Beyond genius level intellect. Immunity to insanity and mimetic hazards. Things man was not meant to know, becomes more of a guideline than a rule. Capacity to learn any magic with enough understanding. This also includes things like ki, chakra, soul power, etc. Possess an internal supernatural reactor that can adapt to any supernatural energy to fuel spells, enchantments, powers, etc. This reactor provides a steady supply of power that will grow with training and practice. Can teach others systems of magic even if they previously lacked the capacity. Their proficiency with said magic is determined by various factors such as bloodline and state of mind. Manipulate entire systems of magic or combine them with experimentation. Damn, he felt fucking amazing. As little as the description had changed, Lux hadn't truly realized just how much that limited asterisk had meant, and if it weren't for his perfect control, the palace above him was sure to have been disintegrated from the pressure of his sheer magical presence alone. And he was thankful as fuck that that was the case, because it would have been a serious hassle to fix that big of a mess, not to mention the judging stares his girls would send his way. Luckily, that wasn't something he had to worry about, and after getting a feel for his new limits, Lux didn't hesitate with his next purchase. Essence of the Mad Doctor Limited. Can make potions that can do almost anything, from immortality to regeneration, or even cause someone to fall in love with a specific target. Limited by user's strength. Immunity to disease and poison, both mundane and magical. Supernaturally skilled at medicine, can cure just about anything with some research. Master of life and biology, able to create homunculi that are superior to regular versions of their species in all areas, including being ageless and perfectly loyal to you. Limited by ingredients used. Can conjure ingredients from thin air. Maximum quality relies on user's strength. Of course, after buying the full Archmage powers, he wasn't nearly left with enough to unlock the full might of something as broken as the Mad Doctor. And if it weren't for the fact that a few of the essence's abilities overlapped with the ones he already had, even the limited version would have been out of his budget. But already, with the new information pouring into his mind, Lux knew that this new power of his was more than worth the expense. And for once, he was happy with his girls taking their sweet time getting ready. Because, with new options available, there was one last thing he wanted to set up before getting on with their trip, something that would make him an absolute menace to permanently deal with. But before he could tear through space to the destination he had in mind, Nor, the little cutie, made her presence known, giving him a dirty look that even Lux couldn't brush off without feeling bad for his little puppers. Come on, Nor, you don't think I'd forgotten about my two baby girls, have you? Lux chuckled, scratching the back of his neck as he blatantly lied, his soul-bound companion knowing that he had indeed forgotten. Ahem, anyways, how about joining us, Aurora? he asked before his golden wolf popped out, seated next to her sister and eagerly looking up at him with her big eyes. Lux was just glad that he hadn't completely drained his essence. His loyal girls definitely deserved a reward for their efforts, and not caring that his savings were now completely gone, he watched as a golden light surrounded the two small forms as their very beings changed for the better. Raising an eyebrow at the two little girls, who were now actual little girls, as they happily wagged their bushy tails that peeked out of their matching shrine maiden outfits, Lux knew it was now going to be even harder to deny any request from the adorable little lollies. He also wondered about the outfits they wore. Was there something fucked up with his subconscious mind? Yes, there was, he decided. But unfortunately for everyone involved, he was given way too much power for his own good. Thanks, Pops, Nor chimed, hopping into his arms and smashing her lips onto his, making Lux wonder if he'd catch a case for violating a sentient sacred gear who, by all means, was definitely underage. He shrugged to himself, slipping some tongue into the black-haired girl's sweet mouth, her fluffy wolf ears enthusiastically twitching. If any omnipotent being wanted to kick down his doors for looting the lollies, then so be it. But it wasn't like this would be the worst thing he's done with no one holding back his whims. Now wholly unconcerned with any consequences, Lux didn't forget about his golden girl as she shyly squirmed in place, kneeling to offer his other side, Aurora only mustering up enough courage for a hug and chaste kiss on the cheek while Nor was preoccupied seemingly trying to suck his face off. But Lux had shit to do, so after letting the troublesome wolf girl do as she pleased for a few minutes he finally had to pry Nor from his body, rolling his eyes as she pouted, hanging limp in his outstretched arms. Now go run along, and as long as you don't cause too many problems, I'll let you out to play when we get to Rose's world, he told the two, Nor scurrying off, likely going to cause more than a few headaches with her new form while Aurora happily returned to his soul space like the good girl she was. Shaking his head, he wondered how long it would take for the girls to realize that his gift wasn't only to give them a humanoid form, but something far more valuable in the long run. Independence, or as close as possible while still being tied to his soul. Before his gift, Nor and Aurora were directly tied to his growth. But now they could freely progress on their own while still being able to draw from his well of power when needed. Honestly, he didn't even know if the spoiled pups would bother putting in the effort, but at least they now had the choice. Though, now that he could finally get on with his business, he could worry about how difficult getting his puppies to train would be another time, and after apparating back to the smoking pits of Valyria, Lux got to work on the first potion he'd be making with his mad doctor abilities. Conjuring the strongest version of the water of life he could, Lux held the stadium-sized sphere of liquid in front of him before adding a dozen phoenix souls, the essence of the fiery bird somehow counting as ingredients he could freely summon, the massive mixture in his magical grasp now ominously bubbling as the dark skies cleared from the power it radiated. And after sprinkling a few more random ingredients that he'd never heard of before, Lux grabbed a cup's worth for himself while hurling the rest into the flaming asshole of this world, a new connection within himself attaching to the entire planet after downing the spicy potion. Feeling the effect hit, Lux burst out into maniacal laughter even after promising himself that he'd curb that particular habit. But how could he not? He turned planetos into his phylactery, and now, as long as the planet stood, his body could reform from any damage no matter what, with absolutely zero drawbacks. Getting a hold of his cackles, Lux teleported back to his palace, not at all worrying about the many ways tying his existence to a planet might affect the inhabitants. A new god's conquest. Impatiently tapping his foot on the marble tiles, Lux regretted ever thinking he was grateful that women could take so damn long getting ready. For fuck's sake, he'd already accomplished the unheard of in the same amount of time it took them to throw on some clothes and whatever else the bitches were doing. It's about time, Lux grumbled, watching two of his beauties sauntering into the room. And while he wouldn't admit it to them, the black leather combat outfits they wore had him feeling a certain type of way. TCH, I wouldn't expect you to understand, Rose scoffed, making one of his perfectly sculpted eyebrows twitch in annoyance. You're right, I wouldn't understand. After all, I'm just naturally this dapper without even trying, he shot back with a gleaming smile and an elegant pose. Yeah, whatever. Rose waved him off. Let's just get a move on, she continued as if he hadn't been waiting for her this whole time. Sure thing, Your Majesty, Lux joked before taking her hand and dropping the playful act. Rose, remember that you don't answer to anyone over there, he told his lover. I know, it's just, Rose paused, surely thinking about all the shit she's been through before ending up in his arms. You're right, it doesn't matter. Thank you, Lux, she said, sending him a pretty smile that he met with a quick kiss as Bella jealously latched onto his side. Grinning, Lux gave his first baby mama's fat ass a firm slap before leading his women through the portal, casting a disillusionment charm on himself and Bella so that Rose could have the spotlight for a while. Girl, I don't know how you survived, but you'll regret what you've done, was the first thing Lux heard after stepping through with Bella at his side, the pompous voice directed toward Rose. Lucius, 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 Rose began, a glamour making her appear as the same teen that tumbled through the veil all those years ago. You wouldn't believe the things I've experienced, she continued, uncaring about the wand pointed at her face. Would you believe me if I said that I've gained untold power from the mysteries beyond? You've gone mad, Potter, the older Malfoy sneered, making Rose burst into uncontrollable giggles. I'd kill you now if my master hadn't commanded that he would be the one to put an end to your interferences. Kill me, Rose cackled as her sacred gear's dark gauntlet formed around her hand, black winds beginning their swirls around her feet. And at that moment, Lux noted that Lucius finally seemed to realize something may have been seriously fucked up, the older man sending out a silent spell uselessly disintegrating against his redhead's necrotic energies. Oh, what's wrong, Blondie? Scared of little ol' me? She asked before flicking her uncovered hand, the man's cane wand being thrown across the underground chamber. Who are you? Lucius paused, not believing that the barely trained girl who lived could possibly show such power. Your worst nightmare, Rose replied, and Lux visibly cringed at that lame line. He'd have to work on the girl's battle banter soon. Cringe aside, her words didn't matter much once she began taking her frustrations out on one of the people who caused her so much trouble growing up, the grown man whimpering as Lux's lover slowly sapped away at his life force, sending a few kicks at his downed form for good measure. Damn, he'd have to make sure not to get on that girl's bad side, he decided, wincing as the final kick landed square between Lucius's legs. Here's a link for a free Patreon membership. patreon.com/CodeKingu/redeem/4E51D. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. Patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days, so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also requires Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. Subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 7 comments 0 vote. Chapter 37. What an entrance. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. A shiver of glee ran through her body, the sickening sound of scrotal squelching ringing throughout the deepest ministry chambers, only the sound of her man's voice breaking her out of the feral trance she'd entered. Have fun, dear. I'll just be over here making sure our dimensional gateway is stable and temporally synchronized. Call if you need help keeping your plaything alive, Lux told her, making her beam in his direction, the man she loved always knowing how to put a smile on her face. Now assured that her time catching up with the Lord of House Malfoy wouldn't be cut short, Rose sent a final crushing kick to the man's crotch before pulling him up to eye level by the hair, low groans the only protests being made. Looking at the pale blonde locks bunched in her grip, Rose was sure the man was just as vain about his appearance as that bitch daughter of his, and with that thought, she made sure the bastard was conscious for what she had planned, a slap to the face sending a molar flying from his mouth as his eyes shot open. Good. I want you awake for this, Rose told him, patting his bloody cheek while staring into a pair of trembling eyes. Conjuring a mirror, Rose forced the man to meet his reflection, her gauntlet-clad hand slowly tracing along his scalp, trails of gray, decrepit skin left in its path, and unless her lover stepped in, Rose was sure that no magic had any hope of reviving the pomp's appearance. Laughing at the man's new look, his head completely bald aside from the few strands of gray hair she was still using as a handle, Rose found the man actually shedding tears for the first time, her cackles only increasing at the sight. Potter, we have your little friends here, release Lord Malfoy, a voice interrupted, the newcomers not at all surprising her, long since having sensed the cannon fodder's movements as they held their wands to the throats of the faces she'd missed so much. Rose knew Lux would allow no harm to come to her friends while he was near, but still, this was something she wanted to deal with herself. These fuckers had targeted her ever since joining the wizarding world, and now that she finally had the power to fight back, she'd gladly show her enemies the errors of their ways. Dropping the cockroach to the ground, her back still turned to the away from the group of Death Eaters, Rose prepared something special for those threatening her precious companions, magic gathering between the tip of her loyal magical focus and sacred gear. Drop your wand and turn around, slowly, the little shit holding Hermione commanded, unaware of the unfortunate fate that soon awaited him. Or don't, I wouldn't mind showing this mudblood her place, he said, reaching a hand for her bushy-haired friend's modest chest. Hey, as if she'd allow that to happen, Rose sneered, whipping around and releasing a black light in an arc before the inbreed fuck could violate her favorite bookworm. The magic sent far too fast for any hope of escape, the goons, wands disintegrating as they fell to the ground gasping for air. Unfortunately for the Death Eaters, because such a quick death would have been a blessing, she'd primarily targeted her spell towards the men's wands, making sure there was no chance her friends came to harm while the leftover deathly energies slowly necrotized the bastard's flesh. Rose, Hermione cried, rushing forward, not noticing her former captor's agonized spasms. Hey, Hermione, Rose smiled, bracing herself before the shorter girl could send them both tumbling to the floor, her best friend latching onto her with all of what little strength she had. Noticing the tears in her friend's eyes, Rose sighed, stroking her fluffy hair while rubbing circles into her back. Even though you'd think she would be used to shit like this after facing near-death experiences each school year, Rose couldn't bring herself to blame the girl. After all, she could only thank her current composure on account of the extra years she'd gained in her lover's support. Sniffling, Hermione finally noticed her new appearance, the glamour wearing off after throwing around such powerful magic, and it seemed that her friend's natural curiosity won over the fright she felt. Rose, what happened to you? Why do you look so different? Oh, was it an aging potion? Or maybe human transfiguration? And what was that spell you used earlier? I've never read of anything like it, Hermione chattered away, the familiar bombardment of questions putting a smile on Rose's face. If you'd let me get a word in, I might be able to answer some of those questions, she teased, tapping her friend's forehead. Hermione blushed, rubbing at the spot she'd flicked, finally giving Rose a chance to respond. Long story short, I fell through the veil of death over there, Rose began, gesturing to the newly golden archway. And spent several years in a different world while only seconds passed over here, she elaborated, satisfied by the stupefied expression Hermione now wore. It was always a treat when she managed to stump the genius witch. That doesn't make any sense. Is this another one of your pranks? Because now really doesn't seem like the time to be messing around, Hermione asked before her bewildered tone quickly turned into a scolding one, reminding Rose of the many times she'd been lectured by the girl after a risky Quidditch move. Ow, would you stop that? Her friend whined after receiving a second flick for her prattling. I can prove it to you all you want later, but for now, I think we're going to have company soon, Rose told the girl, rolling her eyes as she looked over to the still frozen in place Neville, the tubby boy being the other hostage that she'd not been paying much attention to. Where are the others, anyways? She asked, changing the topic. Well, fine then, Hermione grumbled before answering the question. The others were stopped by Tonks. Oh, and she let the two of you come by yourselves, Rose raised an eyebrow. Well, Neville and I may have managed to slip by while she wasn't looking, Hermione admitted, making her snort. So much for being a stickler for the rules, Rose thought. But before she could continue teasing her best friend, their reunion was oh so rudely interrupted by a black wraith barging through the doors. And Rose knew that the ominous swirls of darkness and the wisps left behind, occasionally taking on the vague forms of skulls and other spooky things, was all for show, the magic's purpose nothing more than a lackluster form of flight. Though, her friends didn't seem to share her disdain, Hermione tightening her grip on her arm while Neville's knees went weak as he fell onto his ass. Don't worry my own, I wouldn't let this clown hurt my friends, she told her, trying to pat down the frizz that seemed to raise along with the girl's hackles, only half paying attention to the somewhat disheveled Voldemort reforming in front of them. Did Moody give old Tommy a beating? Or had the old codger finally decided to show himself? Clown, Rose, that's you know who. Hermione hissed, distracting her from her thoughts, but Rose ignored the words, continuing to pat at the girl's frizz while waiting to see how Bella's reunion with her former master would play out. Rose still didn't get along with the bitch, but she at least knew that the older woman hated her parents' killer as much, if not, more than she did. Bellatrix, what has happened? The Baldy's raspy voice spat, and Rose internally giggled seeing Bella's purple eyes narrow at those words. She was sure Tom wouldn't be leaving without experiencing a good amount of pain. It's simple, you fool, your lackey's lost to a little girl, Bella drawled while Rose's eye twitched at being called a little girl. She wasn't little anymore, she'd filled out quite well over the years, thank you very much. Rose, when did Bellatrix Lestrange get here? Hermione panicked, incessantly shaking her arm. Shish, just watch the show, my own, she tried calming the worried witch. Have you forgotten your place, woman? Snakeface growled, the sickly sweet smile Bella now wore promising a bad time for her former master. No, I know my place perfectly well, and I know that it's no longer under that of a cockless bastard like yourself. Bella's words dropped like a hammer, even making Voldemort freeze for a second. Crucio, Tom roared, seemingly lacking the social skills required to solve his problems in other ways than fear and pain. But instead of his target dropping to the ground and pleading for mercy like he was accustomed to, Bella lazily held the red beam in her hand, showing off the power she'd gained after carrying 3 godly children to term. Smiling at the magic held in hand, the red ball turning to the same purple color of her eyes, Bella sent the man's spell back at him with a flourish, and Rose was sure that the sadistic woman added a little something extra to the spell. You know, just to get her point across even further. And like Rose expected, the noseless cunt collapsed into a bout of silent seizures. Though, he did manage to force himself to his knees faster than she'd have expected, albeit huffing and puffing all along the way. Rose wondered if Bella simply hadn't bothered putting in much effort. Now, how about you get out of here? I'm not sure I can continue acting this forgiving for much longer, Bella said, holding up a hand and paying more attention to her nails than the panting Dark Lord in front of her. Rose, what is going on? Hermione panic whined, and Rose was worried the girl might soon pass out from the roller coaster of emotions she seemed to be going through. Let's just say that a lot of things happened on the other side. I'll explain later. Rose waved off the concerns, returning to the ongoing show. You'll rue this day, Lestrange. Pray you fall in battle before I get my hands on you, Voldemort threatened, somehow believing he stood a chance after that pathetic display. Rose simply watched as her mortal enemy made his defeated retreat, his crippled minions in tow, not at all caring about the reign of terror he'd soon begin. Of course, she could have ended the fucker this day, but she wouldn't, not until the wizarding world came begging on their hands and knees, pleading for her to fix the mess they'd created, would she even consider it? Until then, she'd enjoy tormenting the man as his plans of wizarding world domination crumbled around him. Before Rose could further plan her enemy's downfall, a dozen white blobs of light flew into the chamber, making her let out an exasperated sigh. As usual, the adults showed up after the school children nearly died handling what should have been their job. And did they purposely make their form of magical flight the opposite of the Death Eaters? Pretty lame, if she did say so herself. Granger, get away from that woman. Moody barked, his fake eye bouncing around faster than usual while Rose noted that Bella had returned to being unnoticed by all. Oi, I would have hoped you'd recognize the girl who saved you from that box you'd been locked in all school year, Rose poked, knowing full well that the always vigilant Auror wouldn't drop his suspicion so easily. Potter wasn't the only one who knew about that incident, he growled, still eyeing her with that freaky eye. Well, how else could I prove my identity? She sighed before clapping her hands together with an idea. Fine, here, this should be enough, right? She asked, waving her wand as the white doe of her Patronus charm trotted around. Rose, is that really you? Remus stepped past the still skeptical Moody. Indeed, she simply replied, no longer respecting the man who hadn't bothered so much as a letter to his best friend's daughter until receiving a job at Hogwarts. What happened? He began asking the same line of questions as Hermione before being interrupted by a new presence. Love, I've got something to take care of. I'll leave you to your reunion. Lux dropped his disillusionment charm before giving her a soft kiss, the others around her jumping back and raising their wands, only for her lover to vanish from his spot before one of them could do something quite stupid. Who was that? Hermione freaked out, and Rose decided that she'd have to do something about her friend's tendency to overworry at some point. That was my husband, she told her friend as if it were completely normal, the others looking at each other for answers before a new arrival stopped everyone from voicing any concerns. With the cry of a phoenix announcing his entrance, Dumbledore finally decided to show himself as he appeared in a flash of fire, also looking a bit worse for the wear, his beard singed, and gaudy robes frayed. My child, is that truly you? The old fucker asked, and Rose nearly lost it. Yes, for the 1000th time, I'm Rose Potter. The girl who lived, savior of the wizarding world, so just deal with it. And I'm not your child, you old coot. She finished her tirade, making Hermione gasp at her side. Rose, you can't talk to the headmaster like that. Came the expected scolding from the frazzled girl still holding onto her arm. We can talk about this when we get back to the safety of the castle, Dumbledore decided, still assuming her to be the same girl who'd go along with his every word. Yeah, about that, old man, I don't believe there's much of a need for me to continue my studies at Hogwarts, she told him, the old wizard giving her a double take. It will no longer be safe outside the school grounds, my child, the geezer lectured, making her roll her eyes at the ridiculous claim. Aside from that obvious falsehood, I doubt Hogwarts has the prenatal care I require, she said with a grin, holding a hand over her yet-to-show belly. Rose noticed that most of the group didn't know what the term prenatal even meant, but Dumble's eyes widened, and she had to catch Hermione from falling to the ground after fainting. Rose, where is Sirius? He went ahead of us, Remus asked, finally breaking the awkward silence, the words making her deflate after the reminder. We were thrown through the veil. Padfoot didn't make it. She dropped the news, much less sad over the whole thing after realizing that Sirius had only escaped from Azkaban to kill Peter, not once thinking about his goddaughter. Ignoring the gasps at the announcement, Rose handed her limp friend over to Tonks before gesturing for Bella to help her ditch this place before she could be bombarded with further questions. A new god's conquest. With the day's entertainment coming to an end, Lux decided to go and deal with the thing that had been calling out to his divinity ever since arriving in this new world. But with a part of his attention still on Rose, he couldn't help but pause at the statement she'd just made. When did they become husband and wife? Fuck it. It wasn't like he'd ever allow his beautiful witch to leave him, so they might as well be married at this point. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days, so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also requires Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 12 comments 0 vote. Chapter 38 Elohim. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Floating between dimensions after following the pull that led the way, Lux found himself sensing 7 distinct pockets of space, all tied together and surrounded by an incalculable number of runes, the symbols so tightly wound together that a lesser being would only see it as a solid golden wall. But not only was Lux sure he stood at the top of this world when it came to magical understanding and potential, but he felt that the vast array protecting what could only be the heavenly realm was eager to welcome him into its warm embrace. Of course, he took the time to thoroughly scan through the array that acted as an open book for him to peruse. Even though he'd expected something like this to happen before arriving, Lux wouldn't take the chance that this wasn't some elaborate scheme. After all, who knew? Maybe the presumed dead god of the Bible had something sneaky up his sleeve. Lux really did not want to end up as a vessel for the old geezer's revival or some shit like that. Though, after thoroughly combing over every single line of the code-like scripture, it seemed that the unlikely scenario he'd described wouldn't be the case. And as he moved forward, the surrounding magic guided him to the very pinnacle of its domain, the long-since vacant seventh heaven, and the throne at its center, one quite fitting for a god like himself, Lux supposed, a satisfied smirk on his face as he claimed his rightful position. "Welcome, Master. How may I assist you today?" a voice from out of nowhere asked. "Stand by for now," he ordered, only half surprised by the feminine voice speaking along as words appeared on transparent panels, the screens at eye level forming out of thin air after taking his seat. Of course there was an AI in heaven, because why not? Rolling his eyes as he began interfacing with the system that followed his will, his mind working the controls faster than a keyboard and mouse could ever hope to match, Lux realized that he had his work cut out for him if he wanted to get this place up to his standards. Though, after figuring out what he was messing around with, his disappointment was immeasurable, and his day was ruined. Instead of the Ultron-level intelligence he was expecting, this thing could only be labeled as, at most, a virtual assistant. Lux guessed it couldn't be helped. This world's version of God wasn't on par with the cheat-like existence that he himself was, but after reaching the earliest records, he had a good understanding of why this whole system was such a mess. It seemed that Big G couldn't let go of the sentiment felt towards the woman he'd loved, the core of his deceased wife, the sole entity keeping the many faculties of heaven running, and leaving her concentration so fragmented that she was reduced to this glorified Alexa. At least it was an interesting story, Lux thought, humming as he made up his mind on how much effort he'd put into fixing this crippled goddess. Asherah, a mother goddess associated with fertility, sacred trees, lions, and serpents. And if what he'd been reading was the truth, she'd met a tragic end at the hands of the Egyptians' chief deity, the event acting as the catalyst for the Pantheon's destruction, heaven's wrath immediately descending with no remorse. Ancient history aside, as the former consort of Yahweh, it was unlikely she'd give him her loyalty if he simply revived her as she was. And now that the idea of a super AI servant had already been put into his mind, Lux figured it would be a better idea to rebuild the goddess from the ground up, absolute loyalty towards himself alone woven into her being. But that could wait. He'd put acquiring Robussy on the back burner for now. And in the meantime, Lux figured he should let his new minions know their lord has arrived. About to send a command, Lux paused, taking a second to look himself over. Normally, he liked to keep both his divinities in balance, something that reflected in his appearance. Not wanting to start off on the wrong foot, Lux suppressed his darkness to the very limits, his hair and eyes turning completely golden, and if his wings were out, they'd too join in the same color scheme. Ashura, go ahead and reopen the seventh heaven, he ordered after getting himself situated, acknowledging his future AI waifu for the first time since putting her into sleep mode. As you command, Master, Ashura chirped, the golden gates leading towards heaven's lower levels rumbling open for the first time in nearly a millennium. At least the virtual intelligence was useful enough and had an appealing voice, Lux thought, not leaving his seat as he waited for his guest's arrival. Hey, he had a feeling Bella wouldn't be too happy with her newest competition. But as he thought about his beautiful slave, specifically, that juicy rear of hers, a yell echoing through the entire realm had him distracted from the wonderful picture he had in mind. Father, the melodic voice cried, a blonde missile crashing into his chest, Lux's only thoughts now revolving around just how soft the things in his hands felt. Gabriel, get away from that man. Someone else called out, and so wrapped up in fondling the squishy mounts, the concerned voice was the last thing on his mind. But as the three femboys reached the foot of his throne with their light spears drawn, Lux couldn't stop one of his eyes from involuntarily twitching. Fuck, why were these male angels so beautiful? He'd have to keep his guard up from now on, Lux told himself, not at all interested in accidentally crossing swords with the twinks. A new god's conquest. For hundreds of years, Michael guarded the gates leading to his father's abode, exerting what little influence he could to keep heaven's system afloat. So, as the doors he'd only prayed would open one day actually swung wide, he was more than a little shocked to say the least, his brothers and sister joining him in his stupor. Because of his sister's usually lackadaisical demeanor, he'd often forget that he was only barely above her in power, something he was just now reminded of after watching the airhead dart ahead by herself into seventh heaven. And even after following right behind, he couldn't stop Gabriel from jumping into the lap of a complete stranger as the man he'd never seen before desecrated their father's throne. Gabriel, get away from that man. He shouted, angered not by his sister, but by the man defiling her body, the only thing keeping him and his two brothers from immediately attacking being that they felt no malice from the intruder. Daddy's back, the man sitting in his father's seat finally broke the silence, and because he and his brothers were too busy seething over their sister's violation, it took a moment to pass before their mouths hung open at the claim. I am possible, Uriel shouted, looking like he would go on the attack at the slightest provocation. How dare you attempt to deceive us with falsehoods? This must be a ploy of the devils. Kneel, the man on the throne simply commanded, an infuriating smirk on his face. About to deny such audacious words, Michael found himself completely shocked once again, his body falling to its knees against his will, Uriel squawking in outrage as he too followed suit. Such unruly children. Is that any way to greet your father after so long? The man sighed, shaking his head while still molesting the innocent Gabriel. However, as the man finally let his sister go from his wicked clutches, he finally took the time to sense the man's presence, his face feeling numb at the absurdity of what he'd felt. It wasn't the same as his father's, but it was so close that he didn't think any aside from the four great seraphs would recognize otherwise. Michael was conflicted. As the strongest of the seraphs, he hadn't basked in such a powerful holy presence since, it hurt just to remember, he internally sighed, keeping the turmoil off his face. But it also felt too good at the same time, the feeling that the throne of heaven may no longer be his to bear alone. However, there lay the problem. The man in front of him was not his father, and Michael couldn't help but feel as if he were betraying all that he stood for in some way. No, maybe this was their father, simply returning to them in a way none of them could have imagined. I can sense your worry, my child. Be at peace knowing that I want the best for your siblings in heaven. The man, no, his father told him, a hand on his shoulder that reminded him of better times. But maybe now, things would change. Michael guessed the only thing he could do was put his faith in the future. A new god's conquest. A scowl on her disguised face, Bella glared daggers at the foul creatures, their beady eyes giving her disdainful looks as she passed through the open entrance of the marble building. She'd have already burned them to ashes for the disrespect if not for the fact that her master didn't want them causing an uproar just yet. Are you going to tell me what we're doing here now? The annoying redhead asked, also under a simple glamour at her side. Children need not worry themselves over business meant for the adults, she waved off, smiling as the young girl growled under her breath. Bella was already in a terrible mood, so why not drag her reluctant companion down with her, she thought. Take me to my vault, she commanded, handing her key over to the nearest disgusting goblin while ignoring Rose's further complaints. Watching the wrinkled creature roll her key between his nubby fingers while suspiciously looking her up and down had her about to blow. But, luckily for the revolting thing, her narrowed eyes seemed to get the message across, the goblin teller hopping down from his raised chair as he scurried over to another of his filthy kin. Come this way, the other goblin grunted, taking her key and leading them to the ridiculous contraption that somehow passed for a form of transportation. Making sure the silly witch she'd brought along hadn't gotten herself lost, Bella took her seat with a huff, making sure to cast a few discreet cushioning charms before placing the part of her body that her master loved so much onto the hard surface. She truly didn't know how far she'd go to ruin the lives of all goblinkind if her master's property was somehow damaged by these mongrels, but she knew it wouldn't be pretty. Exit to your left, the little thing spoke, and after standing, Bella checked herself over, finding no reason to commit a genocide quite yet as she impatiently waited for her vault to open. Unless you want to die a very painful death, I'd recommend not touching anything, Bella told Rose as they stepped into the treasure-filled chamber, the redhead looking like she wanted to poke her nose into everything. HMPH, like any of these weak curses could hurt me, the girl scoffed, but Bella took amusement in the fact that she kept her distance from the many tempting objects on display. In truth, she had been exaggerating. With her rise in power, and now carrying her master's seed, there weren't many things in the wizarding world that could hurt her master's young lover. But it would still be a hassle if she set off one of the Jamino curses. Reaching what she'd come to this shithole of a bank for, Bella disdainfully held the cup of Hufflepuff in her hand before frowning, the vault doors slamming shut and leaving them in the darkness. Oi, what's going on? Rose shouted, asking the question that she too held. Hey, there's a bounty on your head, Lestrange. I'll be rolling in galleons by the end of today, the goblin cackled, thinking he was safe behind the impenetrable walls of Gringotts. Bella sighed. Well, she tried to play nice. Surely her master wouldn't blame her for simply defending herself, and if he did, she was sure she could receive his forgiveness between the sheets, Bella decided. But before she could blast the exit to bits, Rose had already stepped forward, her sacred gear spewing black mist that had the enchanted doors crumbling to dust in seconds. She wondered who had put a price on her head so soon. This didn't seem like a move her former master would make. The Lestrange brothers were her next best bet. It didn't matter though, she'd get her answers straight from the rat who thought himself clever. Where do you think you're going? Bella drawled, pointing her question towards the creature scampering down a side tunnel, screaming his tiny lungs out. Betsy, thieves, attack, he shouted until breathlessly collapsing against the jagged wall, the malicious aura that she'd been radiating seeming to be giving the little shit a rough time. But as her high heels ominously clacked as she neared the frightened little bugger, Bella found nothing getting in her way, only noticing a cowering scaled beast around the corner once within a few steps of the soon-to-be-dead goblin. You didn't think this little thing was going to save you, huh? Bella teased the creature at her feet, his ugly mug and the tears running down his face making her feel the urge to gag. Comparing what she used to consider a dragon acting in such a way, she ignored the thing her master would refer to as nothing more than an unintelligent wyvern as she lifted the goblin by the front of his tiny tuxedo. Speak, who wanted me captured? She demanded, the painful wince the thing let out as its back scrapped against the jagged walls putting a smile on her face. My lady, I was only following orders. It was the Lestrange brothers who wanted you, it whimpered before Bella gave it a quick end for answering honestly, the small body falling to the ground like a sack of potatoes as she wiped her hands clean. Bella had hoped to run into her ex and his brother at the ministry, but it didn't seem like fate was on her side at that moment. She couldn't wait to get the two fuckers alone. Perhaps she could turn it into a date with her beloved. She knew her master would enjoy torturing the two bastards by her side. Come, let's get out of here, Potter, she said, turning to find Rose messing with the chains of what she now recognized as a Hungarian horntail. Girl, don't keep me waiting, Bella glowered, sick of this imbecile's childish whims. Yeah, whatever, bitch. Just give me a second, the petulant brat waved her off, making her strain to hold herself back from using some of the darker curses she'd been testing on the girl. If only she weren't one of her master's favorites, Bella lamented. And done, she heard Rose murmur as the goblin-made chains clattered to the ground, and Bella wondered just how much death and destruction that little act would cause. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also requires Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 13 comments 0 vote. Chapter 39 The Game. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works, all other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Feeling a sense of loss as the comforting hand vanished from his shoulder, Michael snapped out of his daze, finding his fellow seraphs coming to the same conclusion as him. After all, with thousands of years together as companions, a simple glance was enough to have a good idea of the thoughts running through their minds. Whether this was truly their father or an unexpected reincarnation, heaven's slow decline may finally be at its end. And Michael could tell that this expectation alone was enough to have him and his brothers easily ignoring the odd proclivities that their new lord seemed to enjoy. Now, how about showing me what you've done with the place while I've been gone, their father said, Gabriel still clinging onto his side for whatever reason. Oh, of course, father. Where would you like to start? Raphael eagerly asked, and Michael could see Ural's disappointment that he'd not spoken up first. Good lad, his brother received a winning smile for his excitement. Let's take a look at what you've been up to on the fifth heaven, their father decided after a moment. It made sense, Michael thought. Their father always had a passion for new inventions, but after thinking about the many researchers occupying fifth heaven, he couldn't help worrying about how much of an uproar their visit would create. Ah, father, if I may, Michael spoke up, continuing after seeing his father wave him on. I worry about the commotion your sudden appearance will cause. How should we proceed? He asked, his father's nod of approval making him feel like all those terrible years without him had never even occurred. You're right, son, but you don't have to worry about that. I won't be letting the world know about my return anytime soon, his father told them, and he internally sighed in relief. Michael knew he would have had to deal with so much more paperwork than he already had to if the biblical God suddenly made himself known. Now let's get a move on, his father said, snapping his fingers before a circle of golden runes formed underfoot, their location changing in a flash as they found themselves surrounded by the familiar faces of heaven's primary research facility. Father, I thought you wanted to remain, Michael began before realizing that all eyes seemed to be ignoring their group's presence. Ah, I apologize for my doubts, father, he hung his head low. How could he think his father would overlook something so simple? Kid, you need to chill out. Not everything has to be so serious, his father chuckled, and he froze at the words that again reminded him that this father of theirs was quite different from the one he remembered. All right, as you wish, father, he awkwardly replied, his father rolling his eyes at the formal speech that he couldn't stop himself from using. I'll show you to the main lab. Michael cleared his throat, trying to move past the incident, the silent walk through the pristine white halls only increasing the tension he felt. And seeing his father pick up one of their failed experiments near the lab's entrance hadn't at all helped, his lord giving them a look as he held the cracked gauntlet. An attempt at replicating your sacred gears, Raphael answered the unspoken question while glancing off to the side, clearly trying to avoid their father's eyes. I see, their father hummed, placing the failure back before wandering further into the room, the many researchers still paying no attention to their group. And this is? Their father asked, holding up a playing card. Where to start? Michael thought aloud. Long story short, the devils found a way to reincarnate other races into devils, and this is our attempt to do the same for angels, he explained, a nod of approval sent his way. Hey, it seemed he was getting the hang of this casual way of speech that his father now seemed fond of. Of course, now that you've returned, there should be no use for such creations, Uriel added, making their father shake his head. No, I like the idea. And if the devils are running around turning every race into their kind, we might as well do the same, he told them, and while Michael found the reasoning odd, it wasn't like it was his place to object. Either way, it would only increase heaven's power. I'll help with this project later, but for now, I'd say that that's enough excitement for the day. I'm sure I've been keeping you from your duties for long enough, their father said, a golden circle forming under his feet before he hesitated. One more thing. Find a girl named Asoiaf Argento in one of the Italian churches, and after you do, send her to Gabriel to look after, he ordered before disappearing along with his sister still holding onto their father's waist, leaving them in a stunned silence. And after looking between his brothers, it seemed that they were also worried about their sister's innocence. But no, something like that would never happen, Michael told himself, deciding to instead focus on the task they'd been given. A new god's conquest. Tywin knew he was a stubborn man, a quality he believed served him well over the years, but there came a point when even he knew when it was best to cut his losses. And after receiving the same unbelievable reports from multiple trusted sources, he knew that time was now. A city like no other raised within mere moons, a canal spanning the continent somehow created within the same time frame, and ships that could somehow take to the skies like the Targaryens of old. While the first two claims were easy enough to confirm, hundreds of ships passing his lands from the north with plenty stopping for trade at Lannisport, he'd have never believed that last one if he'd not specifically sent a cousin to Bravos to see it with their own eyes. Apparently, magic was back, meaning he could no longer play the game as he had But as he sat at his Solar's desk, waiting for the man he'd summoned, Tywin vowed that these unforeseen circumstances wouldn't hamper his ambitions. Enter, Tywin allowed, his younger brother opening the door with a nod. You called, brother? Kevin asked, getting straight to the point, sensible as always. Yes, take a seat. We have much to discuss, Tywin told his brother, a frown on his face after realizing that something serious must have happened. I'm guessing this is about the North. Have we discovered anything other than the self-proclaimed king's name? Tywin hummed in acknowledgement. Sending our own spies has been a lost cause, but from what I've gathered from the Bravo Sea traders, following Robert's ambitions will only hasten our family's destruction. Is it that bad? Kevin raised a brow. It appears that the rumors were not the mummeries we'd assumed them to be. Tywin agreed, the words putting a grim expression on his brother's face. Magic, and at heights likely greater than that of the dragons, is now what we must contend with. What are you planning, Tywin? You wouldn't be acting so calm without something up your sleeve, Kevin suspiciously asked, narrowing his eyes as he met his. Be at ease, brother. I know what you are getting at, and let it be known that I have no desire to come into open conflict with such an enemy, Tywin confessed before Kevin could get himself worked up. Here, read this, he told him, sending a letter with a golden seal across the desk, his brother letting out a small snort of amusement after reading the words. I never thought I'd see the day when the Tywin Lannister chose to bend, Kevin said, making him scowl. I do what I must for the Lannister name, he replied, nearly growling out the words. After all, choosing this path was just as unpleasant for him as it was surprising to others. Peace, brother. If what you've told me is the truth, I too would rather this not come to blows, Kevin conceded before continuing. Now, let us talk about this letter. Is that not why you called for me? Tywin nodded. You'll sail to this king's new capital for a parley. I've been assured of your safe passage through the canal. And what of Cersei? Shall I prioritize her release? Kevin asked, and Tywin couldn't help looking at him like the fool he was acting. Cersei has no further use as the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, he explained, tapping his finger along the desk's wooden surface in thought. She's still young and beautiful. If you could offer her hand to King Tenebris, I'd consider that the best outcome. It's as if you're already writing off our beloved king as a dead man, Kevin chuckled. And what makes you think this king doesn't already have a queen? He asked. You're not wrong, I'm gambling on Robert not lasting much longer, Tywin hummed his agreement with the jape. As for the king's queen, I'm already aware of the fact that the position has been filled, but it seems that playing the role of a god has its benefits. King Tenebris is known to keep the company of multiple women openly and without scorn from his people. Selling off his only daughter as a paramour, now that's the Tywin I know, his brother commented, making him grunt his unamusement. Ignoring the attempted light-hearted jab, Tywin simply stared his sibling into silence before getting down to the important things he'd need to know before the coming negotiations. A new god's conquest. Pacing around his room in utter boredom, a baron again realized that sending his paramour and eldest daughters off to a hostile land with only a few guards as protection wasn't his brightest idea. Not that he'd ever admit to these supposed mistakes, but with nothing else to do while under lock and key, he couldn't help the thoughts. But after hearing a pounding on his door, he quickly took a seat, leaning back in relaxation as if everything was under control before the door opened without invitation. Raising an eyebrow as his brother's guard entered, his brother slowly following behind with his cane in hand, he was already beginning to have a bad feeling about how this meeting was going to play out. What's the occasion, brother? You know you could have called for me instead of showing up yourself, a baron drawled, taking a sip of stale wine while trying not to show his discomfort. I felt that you may have gotten some enjoyment from the short walk and thought better of it, Doran rasped as he took a seat across from him. The fucker. Then I must unfortunately inform you that I've been able to keep myself quite entertained these past days, he smirked seeing his brother's scowl. Go ahead, keep playing your games, a baron, I've only come to give you this, Doran told him, tossing a bundle of parchment into his lap. Your little plan has already failed. Ignoring his brother's barbed words, a baron took the hint, skimming over the letters sent by his family, his anger growing with each sentence read. Fuck, a baron roared, shooting to his feet before throwing his chair across the room. I told you, Doran. And what did you do? You've done nothing as your daughter goes through the same as Elia has. He continued to rage, pacing through his chambers until everything not nailed down had been broken or crushed. Are you done? His brother asked as he stood in place, panting. Will you still do nothing? A baron answered the question with one of his own. I don't know why I must tell you this again, but you and I both know that this is not the same as what befell Elia. Arianne has seduced the king of her own volition, and the influence we've gained is far greater than any match I could have hoped for, Doran rattled on, making him grind his teeth in frustration. Influence. Is that all you care about in these games you play? How can we even know if what's written here is the truth? He growled, irritated to see no change in his brother's expression. I've made up my mind, a baron. This is only a courtesy to inform you of your family, not a discussion, Doran told him, standing and leaving him to see the loan. A new god's conquest. Lazily gnawing on a fresh horse femur, one of his rider's mates scratched that good spot behind his horns. Hannibal let out a snort, the plumes of smoke and flames shooting out his nostrils sending the nearby servants scurrying a step back. At least someone around here was showing him some kindness, he thought, letting out a content rumble to show his appreciation. Of course, he had to thank his rider's familiar, the golden one who wasn't a complete menace, for teaching him the magic that allowed him to take on a more reasonable size. If he were limited to his natural state, he wouldn't even be able to feel the tiny hand on his impenetrable scales. My goddess, a Khalasar approaches with a messenger riding ahead, Hannibal heard someone report, his eyes opening in interest only because he knew that the words meant more tasty treats in his near future. Lead the messenger to my pavilion, I'll at least listen to what they have to say. His rider's mate gave her orders, and realizing that there wouldn't be an immediate battle, Hannibal returned to his rest, still enjoying the kind lady's ministrations. You stand before the Lady of Spears, the Mother of Hosts, the Goddess of War. State your intentions, Dothraki, a soldier announced, making Hannibal wonder if all those titles were even necessary. He didn't think these barbaric horse lords would even understand half of their meaning. Scourge of the Stallion, my call offers an alliance. He does not wish to fight against your dragon, the man said, nervously looking in his direction, and Hannibal didn't think this man would be lasting long. The audacity to refer to his rider's mate as a scourge was already a mark that he'd remember against the Dothraki's livelihood. Your horde shall lay down their weapons, free their slaves, and renounce their plundering ways. That is the only way this day shall not end with bloodshed, the goddess magnanimously offered, not seeming to mind the insulting words prior. Maegi, you ask too much. Don't think we won't fight to the last man if it means protecting our way of life, the stupid man argued before spitting towards the goddess's seat, making his eyes narrow. Hannibal knew that he couldn't let the offense go unpunished, not if he didn't want another beating from his rider. Without giving the bastard a chance to react, Hannibal pounced, and even in his smaller form, he moved far faster than something of his size should have been capable of, pinning the man to the ground with a clawed hand to the chest, the Dothraki's face showing the panic that was to be expected. And knowing who was truly in charge here, Hannibal looked back to his rider's mate for judgment. Thank you, Han. How about you take this man back to his leader, she suggested, a kind smile on her face even while ordering the deaths of thousands. Just remember to spare the women and children this time, his rider's mate chided, making him huff in annoyance as he took to the air. HMPH, you accidentally set one tent of infants ablaze and you'll never hear the end of it, Hannibal internally complained while taking to the air, the man still in his talons screaming all along the way. A new god's conquest. Damn, playing the part of the biblical god was exhausting, Lux thought as he left the seventh heaven for the mortal plane. But he knew that any efforts would be worth it, if only for the beauty that was the Archangel Gabriel, the woman he'd just had to pry off himself while promising over and over again that he'd be returning. He honestly hadn't expected the seraphs to be so gullible. Then again, from what he'd seen going over the heavenly system, the big G of this world laid down some pretty harsh conditions on his creations. Unfortunately, the paranoid god had never expected someone like himself to show up after his demise, and Lux had no problem taking advantage of that particular fuck-up. Leaving his angels for another time, Lux figured he could take the time to visit the famous Diagon Alley, Bella's memories letting him appear in one of the magical streets designated apparition zones. But instead of the bustling shopping district he expected to find from the books and movies he'd been a fan of, Lux was only met with utter chaos, wizards and witches screaming their lungs out as falling papers scattered above their heads. And after grabbing one from the air, Lux frowned after reading the headline. Breaking news. Gringotts destroyed by dragons. Has the Goblin Nation fallen? Deciding to put his exploration on hold, Lux apparated away. There were 2 troublesome witches that needed more than a few spankings. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also requires Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 7 comments 0 vote. Chapter 40 Accord. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Slapping the newest issue of the Daily Prophet onto the table, Lux gave his two beautiful witches a glare as his women put on the most innocent facade they could muster. He wasn't going to believe it for a second. It was all her fault. Rose finally broke under his judgmental silence, pointing at Bella like the indignant little girl she often was. I only had to fight the goblins because they were after this bitch, she further explained. Looking to the accused, his ever-loyal baby mama didn't bother arguing, falling to her knees and crawling to his feet before nuzzling her pretty face against his covered crotch. Please, master, punish this disobedient slave. Do you really expect me to believe that destroying the place with their own dragons was your only option? Lux questioned the squirming redhead, ignoring Bella's ministrations and his growing bulge for the moment. I only let one go. How was I supposed to know he'd set his friends free? Rose argued, continuing to make excuses while Lux barely paid attention, plump lips and a lithe tongue tracing the defined veins along his shaft. It seemed Bella had tired of working her magic through the light fabric of his trousers, his manhood now exposed in its full glory. And it seemed Rose finally noticed his current state after pausing mid-ramble, sending a scowl down at his hard-working slave. TCH, fine, I'll go do my own thing. I bet you weren't even listening to anything I've been saying, Rose bitched, heading for the manor's upper floors. You'll stay, Lux told her, the fiery brat likely about to spit out another complaint. Look at Bella here, she's already begun making up for her wrongdoings. As the primary offender, don't you think some of the responsibility should fall on your shoulder? He asked, cutting her off before she could get her retort in. As if I'd join in with her, Rose scoffed, making him smile. It had been a while since he'd had the opportunity to put the girl back in her place, something he always enjoyed whenever that time came around. Let me put it this way, my dear. Get on your knees. And that's not a request, he commanded, stroking his slave's hair as she took his tip into her lovely mouth. HMPH, fine, have it your way. Rose snorted, still following his command after giving her usual sass. That's a good girl, he told her, receiving a glare in return, but with half of his sack in the girl's mouth, the effect was lost on him. You know, if I don't put an end to both of your incessant squabbles, I'm sure that one day you'll end up making a mistake I won't be so easily forgiving of, he told them, his slave giving him those puppy dog eyes that almost had him breaking character. Luckily, I have an idea on how to fix this issue. What is it, master? Bella asked, switching to stroking his saliva-slicked cock with her hand while she talked. In my opinion, it's quite simple. The two of you will override any hatred towards each other with pleasure. He grinned at Rose, the girl seeming to have an idea of where this was going. Now start with a hug and kiss, he told them, not breaking the stare with the disobedient redhead, daring her not to follow his command with a look. Of course, Bella had no problem at all with this arrangement, the beautiful psychopath knowing full well that Rose wouldn't be enjoying this, well, at least not for the beginning parts, he figured. By the way, where the hell are we anyway? Lux finally got around to asking. After leaving the chaos-ridden alley, he'd simply followed the connection he had with his two witches, finding himself in the foyer of a pretty swanky abode that he hadn't bothered questioning until now. It's one of the Black family's manors, master. I was gifted it before my marriage, Bella told him as he nodded along, his mature beauty returning her lips to Rose's soft flesh after answering his question, the younger witch grimacing at her touch. Good, we can break the place in, because we won't be leaving here until you two are the best of friends, Lux said, his hand finding its way under Bella's dress, fondling those juicy cheeks. A new god's conquest. Walking through the white and gold palace halls, Kevin couldn't remember ever feeling so small, not even as a child. But it wasn't simply the grand architecture boggling his mind that had him feeling this way. No, that was only part of it. From the moment they'd sailed into the western passage of the North's Canal, Kevin had thought himself in some sort of feverish dream, sights he could only attribute to magic unnerving him to the bone. Because of this, as he and his party followed the palace's guards through the seemingly never-ending passages, Kevin couldn't help but go over in his head the journey that had gotten him into this mess. He'd not entirely believed the claims that his brother's informants made, but his first inclination that something might be amiss was the constant tailwind through the large passage, the trade galley his group occupied setting a pace he thought impossible. Now, this alone could have been explained by stronger winds of the wintry north. But what couldn't be were the vessels matching their speeds yet sailing in the opposite direction. And as he'd mentioned, this had only been the first sign. Because, as odd as this was, he'd heard of far stranger phenomena in the lands to the east. But the moment Kevin laid eyes on the capital city, any doubts regarding King Tenebris's mystical nature immediately vanished. After all, what else but magic could explain the sight before him? Ships grander than he'd ever heard of soaring through the air or docked atop towering spires, the fantastical image still there even after a good slap across his face, confirming he was truly awake. It was utterly ridiculous, Kevin thought, now sure that there was no option other than kneeling before this new power. In fact, he highly doubted that even Valyria, at the height of its supremacy, would stand a chance. So enamored with the view and the implications that came along was he, that before Kevin even knew it, they were already moored, his guards and the few servants he had brought along already unloading their belongings. My lord, preparations are near completion, only, a servant informed him, the meek young man hesitating while nervously averting his gaze for some reason. Out with it, boy, Kevin insisted, not in the mood to deal with this nonsense when he had more significant troubles to worry about. It's just that it seems that there has been no escort nor delegation prepared for our arrival, my lord, the man squeaked out, making his brow furrow. He hadn't been expecting a warm welcome, but this level of disrespect was quite extraordinary, a sign that he wasn't likely to be taken very seriously in these negotiations. That, or it was simply a ploy to put him on edge. But given who he was dealing with, he'd assume the former. Because in all honesty, it didn't seem like there would be much that the Lannisters had to offer. Very well, continue with your tasks, he waved the lad off, watching as he let out a relieved breath before scampering away. But now that Kevin thought back on that small annoyance, he couldn't deny the fact that he was left in awe after they'd explored the city on their own. Of course, he wasn't going to admit to that once finally meeting with the ruler of this place. Luckily, that time seemed to be arriving, the soldiers halting his group's procession in front of a grand pair of doors, each seemingly made of solid white gold, just another show that their house's wealth would mean nothing to this king. Depressing reflections aside, it was about time, Kevin thought. Why was the throne room so far from the entrance in the first place? You stand in the presence of Val Death Axe, of House Tenebris, Queen of the North and the lands beyond, the Destroyer, the Feller, the Winter Rose, a crier announced as they entered, Kevin and his group pausing at the many titles they'd never heard of. Glaring at one of his men-at-arms, who looked to be dazed by the beautiful fur-clad woman seated upon her raised throne, the man finally got a hold of his senses, awkwardly clearing his throat before finally understanding his duty. This is Kevin Lannister. He's the Lord Paramount's brother, the imbecile introduced, and Kevin would be sure to have a word in private with the man once they were done here. Tell me, Lannister, what brings you to my fair city this day? The Queen boredly asked, and he could only hold his tongue at the indifference shown towards his lordly self. I was under the impression that I'd been expected and would be negotiating with King Tenebris on behalf of my house, Kevin deadpanned, still more than a little miffed that he'd not been greeted upon his arrival. His eye twitching, he watched in suppressed irritation, the Queen thoughtfully humming to herself for what felt like minutes until finally slapping a closed fist onto her open palm. Ah, yes, I remember hearing something about that, she agreed, and Kevin was nearly certain he was being played with at this point, but what could he even do about it? My husband has other duties occupying his time these days, you'll just have to deal with me. But worry not, my word holds equal weight as my beloved, the Queen drawled, making Kevin hide a grimace. He could only hope that her claim was the truth. Very well, if that's the case, I'd ask to see my niece. Our entire family has been worried of her health, he began, figuring he could at least pretend that his brother cared about his daughter's well-being. Of course, and I assure you that all our hostages have been treated with the utmost care, the Queen told him before calling out something, the words not making any sense to him. What is the meaning of this, you abominable creature? Kevin gaped, his niece somehow appearing out of thin air, her belligerent cursing the only thing bringing him back to reality. Uncle, her voice rose, now noticing the extra company as she tried straightening her only half-brushed hair. Finally, it was about time someone retrieved me from these barbarians, Cersei continued, sending a glare at the leisurely seated queen, his heart dropping at the vile words his niece spat. You have no idea the terrible treatment I've gone through in this hellhole. What took father so long? And where is Jaime? The stupid child continued her ranting, a vein in his forehead feeling like it was about to burst. Enough, Cersei, Kevin growled, the gall of this girl. Could she not understand the situation? And besides, he could guess that this mistreatment she mentioned was likely something as asinine as not being served the particular vintage she enjoyed. I am the queen, how dare you? She screeched, and never had Kevin desired to strike a woman more than in this moment. Ignorant girl, I said enough. He roared, forgetting the queen's presence before hearing a tinkling laughter coming from the throne, his face going pale as he remembered where he was. Forgive me for my outburst, Your Grace, he gave a shallow bow, worried he'd ruin any chance of his house surviving the future that this queen and her king would bring to the Seven Kingdoms. No need for apologies, I've already become quite accustomed to your kin's personality. Trust me when I say that I understand how capable she is at bringing out the worst of a person. The queen waved off as he let out a relieved breath. Leaf, be a dear, and silence the wench, she said, and Kevin noticed her giving a wink to the small thing who'd brought his niece into the room, its tiny hand waving at Cersei before she could further embarrass their house, her lips moving, yet no sound reaching his ears. Now that that's taken care of, what do you say we get down to business? The queen smiled, the beautiful sight making his retinue at the side gulp, the lads trying their damnedest not to become drooling messes in front of a powerful monarch. Yeah, that would be most agreeable, Kevin nodded, adjusting his collar, not wanting to fall to the level of his men. My brother wishes for an alliance. We have little faith that King Robert will lead us anywhere other than ruin, he explained, hoping this would work while watching the queen tilt her head from side to side. An alliance wouldn't be out of the question. The only question is, what do you have to offer? She asked, and Kevin was happy to note that it wasn't in a condescending tone. Perhaps an agreement could be reached after all. While I wouldn't be so bold as to offer wealth, our branch families have a few comely girls of marriageable age, he said, hoping that offering another woman for her husband's harem wouldn't get him executed on the spot. I can assure you that my king has no interest in a member of a branch family, she told him after thinking, and while it was a slight disappointment, he was simply happy that she seemed not to be angered by his words. But your niece over here is a different story. Somehow, she's managed to catch the eye of my love. And wasn't that a surprise? Kevin couldn't help but ponder over the thought. He also wondered if his brother had known this would be the case. After all, he'd already given his permission to use his daughter's hand in these negotiations. While further discussion is required, I can guarantee you that my brother would be amenable to this. Of course, her current husband would have to be dealt with first, Kevin agreed, trying not to show his eagerness to pawn off his niece and ignoring the girl in question, frantically shaking her head in the corner of his eye. Trust me, that drunken king of yours won't be a problem much longer. Whether by my husband's hand or my own, his death is an inevitability, the queen said, her vicious grin sending shivers down his spine and raising the hairs on the back of his neck. Wonderful, would you like to get into the details now or at a later date? He asked, trying not to show the fear he felt towards the woman's bloodlust, ignoring Cersei's desperate pounding on an unseen wall. We'll talk later. For now, my servants will show you and your companions to the guest quarters, the queen decided, and as he took his leave, Kevin couldn't believe how well that all went. A new god's conquest. Leaving the throne room and heading to the training yard, Val smiled to herself, happy after securing her beloved another woman, as such a powerful specimen of a man, he deserved only the best. And speaking of matchmaking, Val chuckled after finding out what her adorable daughter had gotten up to in her absence. Ride, my mighty steed. Astrid cried, the steed that was young Jay miserably crawling along the dusty floor as her daughter battled an invisible foe. Val found it cute how attached Astrid had become to Lyanna's son, but more than that, she found the idea of using this development to seat her daughter on the Iron Throne even better. As for the prince's thoughts on the matter, well, she'd just have to make sure that her daughter was strong enough to steal him when the time came. But before any of that, the hardest thing she'd have to do was talk her daughter's overprotective father into not killing the lad, a task that would be more than worth it if it meant seeing her precious child as the ruler of Westeros, and perhaps beyond. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat also requires Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 10 comments 0 vote. Chapter 41 on the hunt. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. As much as Rose tried not to, she couldn't stop the moans from leaving her lips, her hated nemesis exploring her needy slit with a tongue that couldn't possibly be so naturally long and flexible. Have you learned yet, my dear Rose? Her lover asked, fucking the bitch from behind, each thrust making the appendage writhing around her wet cave reach her deepest, most sensitive spots. Like I've said before, we're one happy family, and the sooner you realize this, the easier things will be, he continued, his sanctimonious tone making her growl through the pleasure she was still enduring. Fuck that, I'll never accept this cunt as my family. Rose glared at the bastard teasing her, the intended ferocity she'd been going for more than slightly diminished as she broke down into a convulsing mess, Bella's lithe tongue hitting a spot that sent her over the edge. Well, that won't do. Bella, be a dear and shut this brat's filthy mouth, Lux told the older woman, the bitch's attention towards her dripping womanhood ending as she eagerly agreed, a small whimper stifled at the sense of loss. But still, as plump lips trailed up her midsection, Rose could only moan against her will until her voice was finally muffled in a heated kiss, the sweet taste filling her mouth alone nearly giving her a second climax. My, you two look so good together, Lux teased, and with her tongue preoccupied, she could only send another glare his way in return, a shiver of pleasure running through her body as she felt his hand tracing the outer edges of her needy quim. It'll only take a heartfelt apology if you want me to give you what you really want, her lover told her, the image of his wonderful cock sliding into her depth filling her mind. And that finally made her think. Did she really hate Bellatrix that much? The answer was, not really. Sure, the older witch killed her godfather and was the right-hand woman of the man who killed her parents, but, intellectually, Rose knew that the woman now pressed against her soft body was a completely different person. On top of that, if everything hadn't happened exactly as it had, she'd have never met the man she loved above all else. Now, the only question was, would her pride allow her to apologize to the woman she was so used to fighting with? But as her lover continued teasing her pussy while somehow preventing any form of relief, Rose didn't think that her defiance could last much longer. And as she was close to losing her mind, she finally managed to break the undeniably pleasant embrace, hesitantly staring into a pair of beautiful purple eyes. I'm sorry, Bella. I don't actually hate you, it's just that I'm not good with this kind of thing, she managed to squeak out, a smile forming on Bella's seductive lips at the words. I forgive you, Rose. Like my master has said before, we're all a family for each other, Bella told her, gently running a hand through her long hair. Great, I'm glad that I didn't have to keep to my promise. I had plans tomorrow that I would have had to cancel otherwise, Lux chuckled, breaking the warm moment they were sharing. But before she could send a scathing retort, she was cut off as the accumulated denied pleasure finally hit her, something piercing her to the core in a single thrust. And she said something, because it was definitely not the cock she'd grown so familiar with. Nevertheless, it was pleasurable enough, evident by the fact she was silently crying out while spasming in bliss. Heavily panting after what felt like hours, Rose finally managed to look down, finding the invading object to be some oddly shaped, golden tentacle thing connecting her lower half with Bella's, the older witch happily grinding her hips into hers, and as weird as the situation was, she couldn't deny the amazing feeling, regardless of the implications. Nifty bit of magic, Lux quipped as he walked around to their fronts, seemingly unbothered by the judgmental gaze she sent his way. But again, any cutting remark she could give was cut off, Bella taking his offered shaft in mouth while the sack was perfectly positioned for her own. Humming her annoyance around the testicle occupying her tongue, Rose wondered if her lover had been purposely interrupting her nagging at the perfect moment or not. Either way, she'd find a way to make him regret it, she decided. But that could wait. At the moment, she was too busy lost in her lust, the heady masculine scent filling her nose while whatever dumb magic Lux had conjured was allowing her to fuck her former foe. Shit, this was going to be an odd relationship going forward, Rose thought. A new god's conquest. Well, sister, any ideas on what we could get up to while Pops is busy? Nor asked, making her golden-haired twin tilt her head in thought. Oh, how about we go and pick up those baddies father and Bella mentioned? Aurora smiled, happy with herself after coming up with the idea. You always have to be the goody two-shoes, don't you? Nor clicked her tongue. But whatever, it's not like there's much else we can do while Pops wants to stay low-key, she graciously acquiesced, her naive sister happily clapping at the side. Ah, but how do we find them? Aurora asked. HMPH, nothing a little divination can't handle, nor imperiously raised her nose, disappointed with her sister's lack of foresight. Now, what were their names? LeBoob, LaCroix, Leroy. I believe it's less strange, sister, Aurora helpfully chimed in. Yes, I was just about to say that, she lied, and thankfully her sister decided not to call her out on it as she got to work on the spell. Show me the Lestrange brothers, Nor commanded, snapping her fingers as a holographic display of England appeared in front of them, two red dots lighting up, presumably marking their targets. Hey, weren't we just there? Aurora pointed to the dot at the center of London. It seems so, Nor agreed, rubbing her chin. Let's go and see what's up, she decided, grabbing onto her sister's arm before jumping into the nearest shadow, ignoring the annoying blonde's shocked yelps. You snooze, you lose, she thought, knowing that her sister wasn't very fond of her preferred form of travel. But Nor knew her twin would get over it, and receiving a few dirty looks was better than the alternative. She really hated the light travel that her sister mostly used. And we're here, she whispered, the both of them still veiled from any pesky onlookers. And after turning to her partner in crime, Noor had to try her hardest not to burst out into giggles after noticing the mess of disheveled hair and ear fluff. Remember that, Aurora wheezed, making her roll her eyes, such a drama queen. Stop being a baby. Our prey is waiting for us. Noor chided, ignoring her sister as the paper planes flying through the halls that they'd found themselves in caught her attention. Yeah, I'm fine now, Aurora grumbled, entangling her golden tresses. Where are we anyway? She asked. Let's see, Noor said before hopping up and grabbing one of the hovering papers. Ministry of Magic, Department of Detention, she read the header, crumpling up the message and tossing it away after not finding anything else of interest. So, the baddie has already been caught, her sister commented, making her nod. We can't let that stand, can we? Noor grinned, stalking through the halls with her twin trailing behind. Hey, sister. Do you even know where you're going? Aurora questioned her intelligence, making her pause. Of course I do, she quickly replied, frantically looking around until luckily finding a sign labeled cell blocks. See, it's this way, she haughtily sniffed, turning to walk in the opposite direction they'd been heading. Fools, your efforts are in vain. My lord won't stand for this once he claims his rightful throne. Noor heard the maniacal laughter and shouting before they even entered through the heavy doors that separated the prisoners, giving her sister a look that said, is this guy serious? Seeing Aurora give a shrug, Noor didn't bother lollygagging, easily slipping past the measly defensive wards before standing outside the door that they could still hear insane cackles coming from. See, I told you, their target ranted as she slowly creaked open the cell door. You'll rue your follies, and it will be us who have the last laugh. Who the hell are you? The man paused after she'd dropped her darkness veil, her eyes narrowed, and arms crossed as she stood in front of the bastard, who'd soon be enjoying Bella's unpleasant company. A dead man has no need for such knowledge, she pompously declared, the small shadow behind herself coming to life and gobbling up the fool into her pocket space, the experience just the beginning of his torment to come. And that's how it's done, Noor told her sister, who gave her a thumbs up. Now let's hunt down the other one, she said, reaching for Aurora's arm. No, absolutely not. The blonde jumped back, her hackles raised as she got into a defensive stance. I'll be making my own way there this time, Aurora told her, disappearing into a ray of light before she could object. Irritated, Noor huffed before following behind after entering her shadow realm once again, her annoyance growing after reaching the location and finding her twin giving her a smug look. What took you so long? Aurora innocently asked, and she decided to simply put the troublesome girl out of her mind. Instead, looking around the clearing that opened to a Victorian-era estate. Unimpressed by the choice of architecture, Noor strolled towards the entrance without giving her sister a second glance. Bob, are you seeing this shit? Or have I just had too much pixie dust? She heard an imbecile comment as she walked. Fuck, John, we're going to be rich. Another added, I've only heard rumors, but a beastkin should sell for a boatload of galleons on the black market. Hey, little girl, I've got some treats. Want some? The inebriated goon tried tempting, the gesture giving her flashbacks to the first mission she'd completed for her pops. HMPH, disgusting swine, she muttered loud enough for the two idiots to hear, their scowls quickly turning into agonized wails after flicking a black bolt at each of their crotches. It's a service to humanity, really, she nodded to herself, smiling at the resounding pained cries, any chance of these men continuing their bloodline now gone with their genitals crumbled to dust. Was that necessary? Aurora asked, tapping her small foot on the ground. Father told us not to cause a commotion. What? They were asking for it, Noor defended herself, innocently whistling after seeing her sister's accusing stare. Just let me handle this, Aurora went on, nagging like always. Besides, you got the first one. Now it's my turn, the blonde decided on her own, making her growl cutely. Fine, Your Eminence, show me how it's done, she sarcastically drawled, her nose pointed to the sky. Aurora just nodded, and Noor watched as her sister's golden light enveloped the still crying men, their pain washed away before passing out. Luckily, she could sense that the goody two-shoes hadn't been kind enough to regrow their fifth limb. Otherwise, she'd have made sure they'd be experiencing another round of amputations while her twin wasn't looking. Still, she huffed at her sister's kindness, impatiently waiting as her twin ran ahead to capture the remaining less strange brother. Hey, fuckers, what's going on out there? Someone shouted as they opened the front door, Aurora prancing through the open entrance after sending the man off to dreamland. And not long after entering, radiant light flashing through the windows every now and then, the annoying blonde skipped out the mansion, an infuriating smug look on her face as a golden sphere follows hovering behind, a disgusting man raging against the constraint. Done, and without any death or maiming involved, Aurora arrogantly reported, posing with her hands on her hips. Whatever, let's just hurry up and find a dungeon to put these fuckers in, Nor said. And after that, we can find a place to get some ice cream for a day's hard work, she decided. A new god's conquest. Clutching onto a calming cup of tea like it was her lifeline, Hermione took a long sip after finishing recalling the day's events, the Order of the Phoenix members and her friends remaining quiet as they sat or stood around the empty classroom that they'd reappropriated. Bloody hell, have you gone mad, Hermione? Ron unceremoniously broke the silence, making her frown into her cup. Why would Rose join Bellatrix Lestrange? Now, Ron, I'm sure it was simply the stress getting to young Ms. Granger. Isn't that right, dearie? The Weasley matriarch scolded, while at the same time managing to belittle her recollection. It's true. I saw her too, Neville stuttered out, still shaken over the experience. Hermione could only imagine what her friend was going through after facing the one responsible for torturing his parents into their current unfortunate state. And all while being powerless to do anything about the matter. In fact, she respected Neville for even mustering the courage to attend this meeting. See, Ron, and I didn't say that Rose joined Bellatrix. If anything, it's the other way around, she pointedly eyed the blabbermouth. Have you forgotten the part where I mentioned Lestrange fighting you-know-who into a retreat? She continued, only satisfied after the redhead looked away, embarrassed. Looking to the front of the room, Hermione noticed the headmaster still sat in silence, seemingly in deep thought. She wondered when he'd finally decide to take control here. Hermione, was Rose really okay? Ginny asked, making her give one of her best friends a reassuring smile. Yes, Rose seemed better than ever, she nodded, and the younger girl let out a relieved breath at that. Oi, can we talk about the part where Rose apparently reappeared from the veil a few years older, and on top of that, claiming to be pregnant from some mystery hunk? Tonks butt in, not mincing words, and Hermione couldn't help but notice the weird look that Professor Lupin gave her. That's assuming the one we met was Potter, something I've still got doubts about, Professor Moody added. It all does seem a little too fantastical, someone mumbled, opening the floor for others to state their opinion. How do we know Granger's not under a charm? I'm sure the headmaster would have noticed that by now. Hermione slumped in her seat as she listened to the room devolve into arguments, some having nothing to do with the issue at hand. She could only be thankful that Snape was supposedly occupied by other business. He'd have surely fanned the flames even further. Enough, Moody barked, slamming the butt of his staff against the tiled floor after receiving a look from Dumbledore. There's much to think about, the headmaster started, his voice sounding more tired than Hermione had ever heard. But first, I think it's time the students here returned to their dorms. Was he really sending them away like children after what they'd been through? She thought, the other members of the DA voicing her grievances in a clamor of protests. What about Rosé? We should be asking her any of the questions we have, Hermione spoke up, their headmaster frowning as he stroked his long beard. No, there's much risk. Until otherwise stated, I forbid anyone here from attempting to contact Ms. Potter, Dumbledore decided, making her stomp out of the room. She couldn't believe it, or maybe she could. But whatever the case was, she'd have to solve everything herself. Just like all the other years before. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link, patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days, so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also requires Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link, subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 8 comments 0 vote. Chapter 42 Crossroads. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works, all other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Feeling the carriage stop, Varys let out a sigh, finally able to stretch his tired muscles after a long day's travel. His hips popping and a twinge in his lower back, he once again lamented the need for him to leave the Red Keep. Alas, for such an important event, he couldn't rely on his little birds for the matters to come. Not that he believed his presence would change the outcome of the coming events one bit. No, in Varys's humble opinion, the Baratheon reign was doomed, and his only goal was to gather any information he could for what would come after. Because as much as he loathed himself for resorting to such means, he knew that his only hope for seeing young Griff take his rightful seat lay with the vile sorcerers of the Red Temple. But it would be worth it in the end. No matter the levels he had to stoop to, with his guiding hand, the Blackfires would rise again. And this time, it wouldn't end with mere rebellions. Already, the temple had the beggar king in hand, manipulated for whatever foul deeds they hid behind closed doors, and with the boy as their puppet, the powers from Volantis to Ashai were quickly falling under the Red Priest's control. To Varys, the exiled Targaryen's only purpose had been to act as a distraction for his nephew. But there was magic in King's blood, something he was sorely aware of after his encounter with the warlock who made him into what he now was. He could only imagine what horrors young Viserys was experiencing under the temple's tender care. Not that such thoughts would ever halt the path he'd long since decided to walk. In fact, Varys only wished he'd not lost the girl. Surely, another expendable source of blood from the Valyrian freehold would have only hastened his plans. Lord Varys, a voice interrupted his musings, making him turn to see the newest member of the small council giving his greetings. Ah, Lord Baelish, are you enjoying our journey as much as I? He tittered, easily reverting to the demeanor he'd carefully cultivated over the years. Indeed, there's nothing quite like waking up to the smell of unwashed soldiers before taking my morning shit in the woods, Baelish quipped, his usual smarmy grin on his face, and Varys had to wonder if this was simply a casual conversation or if the young man was up to something. Even with their short acquaintance, Varys had already recognized that the council member dubbed Littlefinger had his own aspirations in this great game they all played, and only time would tell how far he'd reach. For now, he'd only keep an eye on the Master of Coin, something made simple with their similar background, those considered by most to have ascended beyond their birth. Though this sentiment was more so true for himself, as a lord from the backwaters of the Vale, Baelish was equally looked down upon by the fools of the Red Keep. But Varys knew that this underestimation could be used as a weapon just as deadly as any sword, and up to this point, Littlefinger seemed to be wielding it to the best of his abilities. Has our king given any word? Baelish asked, breaking the lull in the conversation and interrupting his musings. Aside from demanding to be left alone after entering the local pillow house. No, he has not, Varys informed the scheming lord, an amused smirk forming on the man's face. It seems the loss of the queen hasn't lessened his grace's spirits in that particular department, Baelish commented, making him grimace. It truly was a distasteful display for that of a ruler. Simply an additional reason as to why he was determined to place a worthy king on the throne. His grace grieves in his own way, I suppose, Varys politely excused. Nevertheless, as lesser lords have a duty to the realm, and even on the road, the small council awaits our presence. Will you walk with me? Baelish asked, making him hide a scowl. You'll have to go without me. There are still a few arrangements I must prepare, he told the Master of Coin, deciding to relieve himself of further conversation. Very well, Baelish nodded, walking off before he let out a sigh. One day he would have enough sway to cleanse the court of such filth, Varys vowed. A new god's conquest. With the crossroads coming into view, Tywin's usual cold heart yearned to return to the warmth of his keep for the first time in years, not since his dear Joanna had passed on the birthing bed. But now, it was the return of his beloved that had him feeling this unfamiliar way. When Kevin had returned from his negotiations, he'd initially been more than livid at the terms his brother had agreed to. He'd felt that the lives of all the men involved in the incident with Prince Rhaegar's family was a price too great for what they were gaining. That was, until the cloaked figure at his brother's side finally dropped her hood, the beautiful visage standing before him sending him into a daze, almost not believing what he was witnessing. Treating behind the throne's back with King Tenebris was a risky move, he had thought. There was always the chance that the remaining kingdoms would group up to see his house fall, but with being the first of the lords to know that the presumed sorcerer king was no mere man, there was no doubt that it had been the correct call. And while the hope he'd had for a Lannister reign over the complete Seven Kingdoms was now naught but ashes, his family's current power was secure, with plenty chance of advancement with Cersei performing her duty as the king's paramour. My lord, the Baratheons, Aarons, and Tyrells have already made camp outside of town, one of his scouts reported with a bow, riding off after receiving a nod. Tywin scowled looking at the heraldry emblazoned with a blue falcon. Jon Arryn would be his greatest obstacle after Robert is dealt with, he thought. But the Lord of the Eyrie was an old man. Who's to say he wouldn't have an accident on his return to King's Landing? After that, the only contender would be the drunkard's kin, a prospect he wasn't much worried about for the time being. Not with Stannis still fighting for the loyalty of the lords sworn to Dragonstone, and Renly only a child of 3 and 10. Yes, it was all coming together. While the lesser lords squabbled over nonsense, he'd solidify his position as Joffrey's regent within 2 moons at most. Stake our tents next to our kings, Tywin commanded his steward, setting aside his ambitions for the moment. Riding past the Tyrell vassals, scowls on their faces as his entourage passed by, Tywin only spared them a glance before urging his horse ahead. As the father of the queen, it was only proper that he claimed a more fitting position for himself. And after ensuring that his men were in order, Tywin headed for the main tent, presumably where he'd find the notable lords waiting, and where the new game would begin. Because he had no doubt that he hadn't been the only lord audacious enough to treat with the Northern King. A new god's conquest. Using his cane to hobble through the rows of tents, yet feeling none of the usual pain, Doran once again checked that his younger brother was at his side and not off causing trouble. He'd have honestly preferred leaving a baron behind, but alas, there was no knowing what nonsense he'd pull this time. At least he was feeling better than he'd ever remembered, he soothed himself, again reminding himself that his heir hadn't been wasting her time in captivity for nothing. After Arianne sent that magical elixir, her letter claiming it would heal all that ailed him Doran felt 20 years younger, a fact that his lovely wife was now sorely aware of, countless nights spent rekindling what was left of their vows. To say the least, Doran was thankful that his spirited daughter hadn't forgotten about her father, something he'd not put past the girl from what Tyene had reported, so infatuated with her lover as she was. Smitten children aside, they'd finally reached their destination, a baron's grumbling all along the way as they passed by Baratheon banners the furthest thing from his mind. My lords, Doran nodded after stepping through the flaps and finding his fellow lord paramounts along with the small council seated, representatives from lesser houses standing at the side. Good, with everyone of note joining us, we can finally begin, Jon Arryn spoke from the head of the table. Will His Grace be joining us? Doran asked, taking an unoccupied chair as a baron moved to stand beside the other lords. The king is currently preoccupied, the hand grumbled, and he could easily guess as to the reason. Robert was known for his proclivities, after all. Then let's begin, and to make things perfectly clear, I believe I speak for us all when I say that a war is the last thing our realm needs, Tywin Lannister began, and Doran had to take a moment to look over to his brother, worried the fool might draw a dagger on the man he hated with all his heart. Nonsense. How can we let these offenses go unpunished? The Lord of Highgarden slammed his meaty palms on the table. I want my daughter returned and their heads on spikes. The fat flower continued, those around the table, including himself, giving the man an odd look. Please, Lord Tyrell, we must keep our heads, else we'll never get anywhere, the Lord of the Eyrie tried calming, the Reach Lord huffing his indignation. Leaning back in his seat, Doran realized this was likely to become a lengthy endeavor. Something he wasn't looking forward to. A new god's conquest. Lounging in the pavilion erected next to her wheelhouse, Olenna happily picked through the dishes prepared for breaking her fast, no longer having to worry about pesky issues such as the stomach pains that came along with old age. No, she'd no longer need to worry about any of that, she thought, twiddling with the pendant around her neck, a part of the bargain she'd made with Queen Tenebris and the only thing keeping those around her from making a fuss, its only purpose meant to disguise her new appearance. Olenna had her youth back, and even with the heavy price, she felt it was worth it. If only for the fact that if she were to one day keel over, Mace would surely bring their house to ruin with his stupidity. She should show her gratitude. Maybe she'd allow the young king a night with an experienced woman, Olenna thought with a snort. But that would have to wait. Once their whoremonger of a king got himself killed, only then would she think about taking a long-needed respite to this new capital she'd heard so much of. In the meantime, life was good, she decided, the only worry she had left being that Mace was most likely making himself look the fool in front of the gathered lords. A new god's conquest. Yes. Harder. I'm almost there. His buxom queen cried, and Lux of course obliged, his hips slamming against the pert rear with enough force that any mortal's pelvis would have been shattered to pieces by now. Do you even know what your request has cost me, love? He growled into his wife's ear, one hand firmly gripping onto her beautiful blonde locks while the other grabbed onto one of her wonderful milk-filled tits, all while not once pausing his long and deep thrusts. Please, work your frustrations out on me, she begged, her needy cunt gripping his shaft like a vice before letting out a scream of pure ecstasy. Ah, fuck, I'm coming. Don't think I'm done with you just yet, he told his panting and exhausted woman. Because of your little games, I've missed out on a perfect mother-daughter pair. There's nothing stopping you from stealing the woman. Surely she couldn't resist your charms, Val suggested after catching her breath, making him hum in thought. Nah, I don't think I will. Tywin is one of the few lords of this shitty realm that I can respect, Lux decided, drawing a moan from his lover as he pressed his arousal-slicked head against her crinkled hole. If that's so, then I can only continue paying for the error of my ways, Val purred, slowly spearing herself onto his twitching rod, her puckered asshole welcoming his intrusion. And you're already off to a great start, Lux chuckled, enjoying his woman's tightest hole. We'll just have to find time to work on your negotiating skills, he told her, not knowing if his first wife was even paying attention to his words, so focused on pleasing his cock as she was. Lux let out a satisfied sigh, simply kneeling behind his Nordic beauty, letting her do all the work as she worked off her debt. It truly was a sacrifice he was making, but he could be patient just this once. Besides, it wouldn't be long until little Danny and the unborn Marcella blossomed into the beauties they're destined to be, he thought with a smirk on his handsome face. But he wasn't lying when he told Val that she was a terrible negotiator. After she'd contacted him, interrupting the fun he was having in the other world, he couldn't believe that she'd only been planning on demanding Cersei's hand in return for a resurrection. After all, that specific gorgeous bitch was already his. Luckily, nothing had been made official, and after knocking some sense into his wildling wife, she'd added more to the deal, including the lives of Gregor Clegane, Amory Lorch, and all their men. Lux didn't really give much of a hoot about Tywin's dogs, but he figured that giving his Dornish princesses their revenge would make them much less pissy once they eventually found out he'd allied with their sworn enemy. Feeling his balls twitch, Lux put any further thoughts of politics and such out of his mind, leaning over to catch his lover's soft lips in his own before depositing his load into her deepest depths with a grunt. You know, as troublesome as you can be, you're worth it, love, he told her, collapsing onto his back and pulling his sweaty partner into his embrace, enjoying his wife's warmth in the afterglow of their rough fucking. Of course, dear husband, Val giggled, drawing light circles on his chest with her dainty fingers that held enough strength to crush skulls with ease. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days, so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also requires Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. Subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 7 comments 0 vote. Chapter 43 Keep your friends close. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Opening her eyes from a happy dream, Ginny squeaked in fright, a shadowy figure looming over her body in the dead of night. Calm down, it's me, the shadow spoke, making her realize it was only her friend who decided to terrorize her. Hermione, what are you doing? She whispered, poking her head out of her bed's curtains, her dorm mates, still seemingly asleep after her cry. It's fine, I've already placed a silencing charm, Hermione told her as Ginny's rapid heartbeat calmed down. That wasn't what I asked, she replied to the older girl, still whispering out of habit. We need to find a way to contact Rose, Hermione continued, answering her question with the statement. Ginny paused, rubbing the sleep out of her eyes. But the headmaster told us, she trailed off, realizing that what she was about to say was quite silly. Because when have they ever done as they were told? The professors will never listen. I'm sure most of them don't even believe that it was the real Rose that I met, Hermione huffed. Okay, you're right, but where should we start? Ginny easily gave in, not doubting the smartest witch of their group for a second. Oh, what about Hedwig? She asked after a moment of shared silence. Hermione frowned, shaking her head. I've already tried the Ollery. Hedwig is gone, and the other owls return with my message after only a few minutes of searching. So, she's placed an owl ward on herself? Ginny asked. If Rose doesn't want to be found, then what are we going to do? You wanted to see me. A new, teasing voice interrupted, making her and Hermione jump at the sudden intrusion. Rose. Ginny's jaw dropped, wildly blinking at the otherworldly beauty of the woman casually seated on her mattress. But how could she mistake her? It was, without a doubt, her best friend. In the flesh, Rose said, her cheeky grin only putting Ginny even more at ease before being pulled into an embrace that she had no hope of escaping. Rose, what happened to you? Ginny asked, her voice muffled by large mounds of flesh that were definitely a new thing. I'll get to that soon. For now, let me enjoy having my two favorite girls all to myself. Rose laughed, and Ginny felt Hermione being pulled into the tight group hug. Rose, how did you get here, and did you place a listening charm on me? Hermione's tirade of questions began, all but the first going unheard as Ginny couldn't help but compare the large, suffocating chest with her own barren plains. And after finally being released, gasping for air, Rose began telling her story, a blank stare finding its way onto her face at the extraordinary events that her friend had been through. A medieval world, a dashing savior, and living as royalty. It was all nearly too much for her to handle, and looking over at the wide-eyed Hermione, she was glad that it wasn't only her going through the experience. But Rose, are you really? Hermione began after Rose finished, glancing down at the older girl's midsection. Pregnant, Rose smiled, finishing the question for her friend. I've said nothing but the truth, she told them, lifting her shirt before placing their hands on her belly that was only just beginning to show. But Rose, you're so young, and what about school? Hermione asked, making Rose snort. I'm only a few years younger than when my own parents had me. And besides, there was no need to wait, not when I've already found the best possible man, Rose answered. But Hogwarts, Hermione still grumbled. Hey, silly girl, the professors here have nothing left to teach me, Rose explained. In fact, I'm sure that's just about the same for you, she said, rubbing at Hermione's frizzy hair. But enough of that, I have a gift for you both, Rose continued without bothering with Hermione's displeased expression, pulling something out of her pocket. I asked my man to make something for your protection. I wouldn't be at ease leaving you two alone here. Not when something life-threatening seems to happen each year, Rose told them, the pendants she held in hand disappearing and placed around their necks in a display of unseen magic. Ginny looked down at the golden lion attached to a matching chain. It was a work of art, and even without the fact it was enchanted, it was something her family would never have been able to afford. And it being the sigil of their house only made her like it more. Only. Rose, this is too much, she said, already reaching for the clasp before feeling a hand grab onto her arm. None of that, Jin. And besides, it's already bound to you. Rose stopped her from returning the lovely gift. Then, thank you, Rose. I love it, Ginny gushed, vowing to herself that she'd cherish her new necklace forever. Yes, it's wonderful, Hermione agreed from the side. Good, I'm glad you like them, Rose gave them another hug. And give this one to Luna tomorrow, she added, handing Hermione another pendant, this one with a bronze eagle attached. Does this mean you'll be leaving? Ginny hesitated before asking. Rose nodded. Soon, but don't worry, I'll make sure to stay in touch. Ginny sighed in relief at that. She didn't really care much about Rose dropping out of Hogwarts, but the thought that she'd never see her friend again worried her more than anything. But it's late, and I don't want to keep you up all night, Rose continued, making her frown. Though, I might as well join you too. And before Ginny could question the statement, she felt herself being pulled down, nestled against Rose, who took the middle of the bed with her and Hermione on each side, those menacing breasts a little too close for comfort. Now stop worrying about the future for now and get some rest, Rose said before Ginny felt herself drifting back to sleep despite the many thoughts racing through her mind. A new god's conquest. Groaning, Robert rolled out of bed, a yelp going uncared for as one of the forgotten servant girls he'd taken a liking to bore the full brunt of his mess, the poor lass nearly crushed to death through the long moments it took to finally get to his feet. Ah, nothing like stale wine for washing down the taste of stale pussy, he thought, tossing his goblet away before fumbling for the tense chamber pot. Someone, get in here and dress your king, he bellowed, annoyed that all the noise he'd been making hadn't alerted his page by this point. Apologies, Your Grace, a meek lad he'd already forgotten the name of simpered, scurrying around and rummaging through his trunks for a fresh pair of robes. Only grunting his dissatisfaction, Robert noticed the blonde hair and green eyes of the boy, another Lannister cunt, he supposed. But gods did he want to give the boy a good slap, especially when the fucker wouldn't stop fussing with the tiniest out-of-place fold after dressing him. Enough. Go ready my warhorse, he finally snapped, the kid he still didn't know the name of jumping at his shout and finally leaving him in peace. Stomping out of the tent, Robert mounted his waiting steed with a grunt before riding to where he could see his lords waiting. Damn, he'd put on a few pounds since the war. Maybe he'd need to cut back a little, he thought. Your Grace, the carrions he had to call his lords greeted as he approached. Are we ready? Robert simply asked, not wanting to get into courtly small talk so early. Yes, my king, the agreed-upon numbers are ready to set out once our scouts return, his hand told him, making him nod at the good news. Gods, Robert didn't know what he'd do without his father figure there to take care of such matters. Assembling a procession of squabbling lords was the last thing on his mind. It seems we won't be waiting long, Tywin commented, looking towards a nearing rider. Your Grace, my lords, we've spotted King Tenebris's host, the scout reported. Only what? Out with it, man, Robert hurried him along. Your Grace, there seems to be a town of sorts erected where only open plains lay just hours before, the rider responded, Robert and his lords pausing at the words. What of their numbers? Tywin asked, the only one seeming to take things in stride. No more than 1,000, my lord. Tywin nodded. Then I see no reason to delay, Your Grace. Aye, we'll have to see this town for ourselves, Robert agreed. Now off with you, he commanded the reporting scout, the man eagerly taking his leave. With that said and done, one of his king's guards who'd been following him from the start, took the lead, with the Kingslayer and Selmy staying by his side. It wasn't a long journey, and as he caught sight of the planned meeting spot, Robert had to admit that what the scout had reported was the greatest understatement that he'd ever heard. So much so that he barely paid attention to the gold-clad spearman who led them through the white marbled structures, only coming back to himself after arriving at a theater of sorts with more than enough seating for their group. Robert frowned at the empty, raised throne on the other side. It was obvious that it was meant to put them at a disadvantage. Ignoring the slight, he looked to the two women standing in the front, guards on each side. Lords of the Seven Kingdoms, on behalf of my god, I welcome you to this parley. The woman he could guess was of Yitish descent spoke up, and if the situation were different, Robert knew he'd be finding a way to drag the pretty little thing off to his bed. What is this nonsense? Does the king not see fit to greet his guests himself? John pressed the woman. Our lord has much he must attend to as the chief deity of a pantheon. His eminence has no time for such trivial matters, the girl told them, apparently still playing at the mummery that their king was a god. Pantheon. We were only aware that you worshipped a single god, his master of whispers questioned, making him hold back a sigh. Who cared about what these fuckers prayed to? I'm sure that there are many things that you are still unaware of about us, the woman who hadn't introduced herself waved off, not speaking further on the subject. Robert was sure the eunuch would have further questioned the woman, but before he could, ungodly roars, the likes of which he only now had the misfortune of hearing, echoed throughout the skies, all but their host stiffening at the sound. Fucking gods above, he didn't hold back a curse. And how could he? A wheelhouse descending from the skies before his own eyes, 6 dragons at its reins. Looking to the lords at his side, Robert had to make sure he wasn't seeing things, the others in a similar state of shock and awe to his dismay. Up to this point, and despite the tales of magic he'd been told, he'd assumed this would end in a war akin to how he'd taken his throne. But now, it didn't seem that this was something his mighty hammer would so easily take care of. A new god's conquest. Taking her seat well above the assembled rabble, as was only proper, Val gave the gawking onlookers a winning smile, reveling in the fact that she'd won, her free folk now the ones calling the shots. Thanks to her wonderful hubby, of course. Ahem, Val pompously cleared her throat. Now, shall we begin? Begin? What's the meaning of this? Were we not meant to treat with the king? A fat lord who she recognized as the paramount of the reach ranted, her eyes narrowing at the fool. As I'm sure Yaling here mentioned, the king is a busy man, but I assure you that my words hold the same authority as my husband, she informed the mongrel, a round of grumbles going around the assembly, their displeasure only heightening her mood. If that's the case, then so be it, the lord seated next to the kneeler king said. But as the one who called for this parley, may we first hear your demands? If Val didn't have an image to uphold, she was sure she'd be rubbing her hands together like a cliché villain, her only goal to make the next hours as miserable as possible for the kneelers. Already, the lords who hadn't made their treasonous bargains were close to shitting their britches after seeing her husband's pets, and as the useless back and forth proceeded, she was delighted that a battle was surely to have already broken out if not for the fire-breathing lizards at her side. A new god's conquest. Watching through his lovely queen's eyes, Lux figured it was about time he made his entrance. You ready, Aurora? He asked, the wolf girl popping out with a nod. Of course, father, Aurora answered before disappearing, a regal set of golden armor forming around himself in her place, his other wolf girl showing up a moment later with a cute pout on her face. Don't worry, I'm not going to leave you out, nor. Lux rolled his eyes, willing the black-haired lowly into a similarly colored great sword, the abyssal aura surrounding the deadly weapon eating away at any light that came nearby. Now dressed as a god king like himself should be, Lux summoned the woman who he'd decided would be joining him on this outing, her usual scowl ever present as she stepped out of his magic circle. What's wrong, my dear? Are you not happy to be seeing the outside world again? Lux asked with an insufferable smile on his handsome face. TCH, you know that I'm only doing this because you threatened to separate me from my son, Lyanna sneered. And, you know, I'd expect that someone like yourself would show a little more gratitude towards the god who'd revived them, Lux deadpanned, only receiving a glare at his words. Can we just get this over with? The prickly northern beauty asked, making him roll his eyes. Whatever, be a grouch then, he told her, already plotting on how he'd soon be fucking some sense into the petty bitch. But for now, Lux simply dragged the woman away before hunting down his dragon. He had to arrive in style after all. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days, so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also requires Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. Subscribe Star. com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 8 comments 0 vote. Chapter 44 In Your Enemies Closer. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Anne. Sorry for the wait, some not so fun family stuff happened. Narcissa frowned while watching their house elf clean the filth from her husband's newly crippled form. This wasn't at all how she'd expected her life to end up as after being accustomed to standing at the top of magical Britain for so long. She knew Lucius had never been the greatest of duelists, but the company they kept valued strength, and already she could sense the other Death Eaters plotting and scheming behind the scenes, their wealth the only thing keeping the hounds at bay for now. But with Lucius's current state, seemingly no magic, nor elixirs affecting the gruesome injuries, she didn't know how long that would last before the others got any ideas into their heads. Thinking on how she'd keep her daughter away from this mess during the summer break, Narcissa noticed her husband's bloodshot eyes trembling as he looked to her. No, that wasn't right. Lucius was looking over her shoulder, and before she could whip around, Narcissa froze, a feminine arm wrapping around her waist. Damn, Rose really did a number on your husband, the intruder spoke, immediately recognized as that of her insane sister. Bella, why did you betray us? Narcissa couldn't help but ask the question that had them all stumped, the Dark Lord's most fervent supporter seemingly switching sides without a hint of reason. I've seen the light, Sissy, and soon, so will you. But don't you worry, Sissy, my new master does his best to keep his possessions as happy as possible. Of course, that's as long as they behave, Bella ranted, and despite her efforts, she somehow couldn't move an inch within her sister's grip. Sister, have you gone mad? The Dark Lord won't let this stand, she told her deranged sibling, only able to resort to threats in her current state. Though, if the whispers of what happened at the ministry were true, her words would be unlikely to have much of an influence. Hey, forget about that cockless fucker. I simply left the bastard alive because it wouldn't do for his downfall to be so painless, Bella giggled, her sister's words affirming what the Dark Lord's closest followers were trying to hide. But that begged the question. What did the psychopath want from them after reaching her current level of strength? I can tell you have questions, Sissy, but worry not, all will be revealed in time, Bella purred, making her shiver at the tone. However, I think a change in locale would be best for that particular conversation, she went on, Narcissa finding herself in a completely different room within the blink of an eye, the magical transportation so seamless that it left her utterly baffled. What is the meaning of this? Her voice trembled, horrified at the sight in front of her. Completely naked, a brunette lay unconscious, a decorative collar the only thing on her pale flesh, a golden chain binding her to the headboard. And even though it had been so many years, she wouldn't have been able to mistake the woman for anyone else other than her estranged sister, Andromeda. It's simple, Sissy, the Black family will rise once again. And even if that means I'll have to drag it up kicking and screaming, then so be it, Bella answered, and Narcissa felt her skin goose pimple not from fright but from the cool air hitting her as she joined her sleeping sister in a state of equal undress. How do you intend to bring about our family's rise? She couldn't help but ask, despite dreading the answer. By the same way that I've already begun to, Bella replied as she heard the slight ruffling of clothing. Here, look at my adorable babies, her sister continued, pushing a moving picture of 3 toddlers in front of her face. How? She gaped at the image, the oldest one a striking match to her sister, while the younger ones matched her in all but coloring, one with blue locks and the other wearing curls of deep green. How isn't what's important here, but the fact that you'll soon enjoy the luxury of carrying my master's seed all the same, Bella proclaimed, seeming to be lost in her own, deranged world. Narcissa was now close to breaking down at this point. How could everything have gone so terribly wrong in a single day? And as she felt a new pressure forming around her neck, likely joining Andromeda in her collared condition, she felt as if her fate had been sealed, but what she was truly fearing was leaving her daughter to face her parents' mistakes alone. Shish, Sissy, you don't have to worry about that beautiful daughter of yours. I wouldn't leave such fine breeding stock in the hands of those degenerates, her sister cooed, and she didn't know whether she should be feeling relieved or terrified at the implications. At the very least, the Dark Lord's sycophants wouldn't be able to get their hands on her little girl. Please, Bella, if our past still means anything to you, don't hurt my daughter, Narcissa begged, already resigned to her fate. Hurt? Oh, no, Sissy, I assure you that pain will be the last thing your little girl will be experiencing, Bella claimed, the statement not easing her worry in the slightest. But before she could get in a protest, she felt herself being dragged onto a separate mattress next to her still sleeping sister, a third, empty bed in the room sitting there menacingly, and she could only hope it wasn't meant for who she thought it would be. Now rest, dear sister, you're going to need it, were the last foreboding words she heard before forced to close her eyes. A new god's conquest. Hannibal let out a mighty roar, picking up speed as he broke through the clouds. Lux realized his dragon was quite the prideful beast while not being bullied by his little cuties. With his magic only allowing a gentle breeze, Lux took full advantage of having the grouchiest of his collection seated so close, his strong arms wrapped around the young mother's soft tummy while Lyanna didn't hide the scowl on her pretty face. What's wrong, my dear, not enjoying the magnificent view? Lux smirked at the she-wolf, a snort of contempt her immediate reply. How could I with a lecher groping at my body? Lyanna growled, making him chuckle. Think of it as the price for my generosity, Lux easily shot back, the ungrateful bitch keeping her silence instead of playing along with his banter. But fuck her, she'd soon know her place, and in the meantime, he'd take all the liberties he wanted from her lithe curves during their short journey. And just before Lyanna could blow a gasket, the big oaf below let out another roar, interrupting his fun as Hannibal started his descent towards an open clearing near where the party was taking place, his perfect vision allowing a clear view of the little lords jumping at his mount's grand announcement. Landing far gentler than something of his size should have been capable of, Han struck a pose before the horrified audience, golden flames spewing from his maw as the cocky shit basked in the limelight for once. Shaking his head, Lux took the grumpy northerner into his arms before easily gliding down to the marbled floor, one of the few times he decided to display his wings, truly making the point that he was above these trifling mortals. Smirking, Lux strolled over to his seated queen, the southern lords gawking between his divine self and the dragon that could bring ruin to any of their puny castles. On the other hand, Bobby B only had eyes for the beauty at his side. Val, my love, I hope acting on my behalf hasn't been too much of a hassle, has it? He asked, a hand on the side of her pretty face. Of course not, husband, in fact, things were just becoming exciting, Val claimed, standing from her throne for him to take her place, finding a new seat on his lap, Lyanna mumbling something distasteful under her breath as she remained standing. Lux internally rolled his eyes at his wife's words. He'd originally planned on allowing his girls to handle these matters, but thought better of it after realizing that the bloodthirsty wildling would have likely resorted to an all-out war if he didn't step in. Normally, he wouldn't have cared much, but Westeros was far too interesting of a place for his games to be ending so soon. His wife's eagerness for violence aside, Lux figured he should finally address his waiting guests, turning his attention away from the bubbly rear wiggling on his groin. So, I've been informed that we're far from coming to a conclusion to these talks, he drawled, relaxing back into his throne as the lords nervously glanced between each other. King Tenebris, we would appreciate an answer for this. We've followed our agreement to the letter, yet you've brought these beasts as a clear threat, the hand of the king spoke up, his fellows nodding along. What? These little guys? They're harmless, Lux chuckled, blatantly lying. Still, I don't remember saying anything about leaving our pets at home, he continued, Hannibal's low rumbling making them flinch, the big guy not caring for being referred to as a pet. Fuck the dragons. Lyanna, is that truly you? Robert roared, and Lux was really hoping the bear of a man wouldn't end up breaking down into tears. Your Grace, you don't mean, Jon trailed off, obviously not the only one who hadn't recognized the recently resurrected Stark. Gods, Jon, can't you see it? I wouldn't mistake that face for any other, Robert turned to his foster father, the old lord's disbelief clear. Well, go ahead and say something, Lux said, nudging Lyanna's back with his wing. It's true, my name is Lyanna Stark. In his lord's infinite wisdom, King Tenebris deigned it appropriate that I should not have remained at peace in the afterlife, Lyanna declared, making him shrug at the girl's sarcasm. This is blasphemy. Your Grace, we can't allow this vile sorcery to stand, Maester Pycelle wheezed, already playing the part as a nearly senile old coot. I must agree with our Grand Maester, whether a mummery or not, this is an affront to our gods, old and new. What purpose do you have by desecrating the deceased? The hand questioned, and Lux wondered how these people still doubted his divinity after all that he'd shown them. When will you fools realize that you're not dealing with a mortal? Lux asked, not expecting a reply before continuing with a monologue. But to answer your question, I've come to realize that the North will never bow to a lord other than a Stark. So, Lyanna here will bear me children with blood of the kings of winter. Robert, please, save me, Lyanna shakily pleaded, the little bitch taking the opportunity to stir some chaos, and Lux was all for it, watching as the chunky king stewed in rage. I've had enough of this horse shit. I say we settle this with a duel, no dragon, witchcraft, or godly nonsense. Robert decided, probably realizing that this was the only chance he had. Robert, you can't, the king's hand began. I don't want to hear it. Jon, don't waste your words trying to stop me, Robert growled, flipping his seat over as he stood. Someone, get me my hammer. Bold of you to assume I'd accept such a demand. I could easily sit back, watching as my army and dragons tear your realm apart. But I like your gumption, so let's get this over and done with, Lux agreed, lifting his woman off his lap before walking down the throne steps. Now facing the unworthy challenger, Lux shrugged his blade off his back, the man taking a step back from its radiating aura alone. You don't have to worry, you're not worthy of dying by this blade's edge, Lux told his fellow king, his black sword and golden armor transforming back into their lowly shrine maiden forms, leaving him in nothing but a pair of silk trousers, his lovely war goddess and wife drinking in his chiseled upper body. And perhaps on account of the many shocking sights the lords had already been through today, they barely reacted at his armaments turning into little girls, the two taking a seat to watch the show. Fine, don't complain when my mace is caving your skull in, Robert grunted, hefting his war hammer in a single hand before charging with an overhead strike. Lux sighed. Even though he knew he shouldn't have, he kind of expected more from a man who was feared by all on the battlefield, but even while suppressing all but the slightest of his strength and reaction speed, the blow meant to kill him in one hit was easily sidestepped, a crater of cracked marble left where he stood. Is that all? You're going to have to do better than that if you don't want your dear Lyanna moaning my name on our wedding bed, he mocked, the veins on his opponent's head looking ready to burst. Ours is the fury, was the only response he got from his taunting words, and Lux could feel a shift in the surrounding mana as the words fell, the follow-up attack coming at him at speed surpassing any of those he'd fought to this point. Still, even with what Lux assumed was the blood of the Storm Kings giving him a boost, he only had to take a quick step back to avoid the wide swing. Now, that's more like it, but I can already imagine your first love wrapping her legs around my back as I plant my seed in her fertile womb. He didn't forget to toy with the man, all while ducking and weaving through a berserker rage-fueled onslaught. Just fucking die. Bobby B shouted, nearly exhausted at this point, yet his final strike was the most powerful of the bunch. But this time, Lux didn't bother dodging, catching the man's weapon with a bare hand before it could hope to reach its target. He'd had enough fun tormenting his prey and figured that this would be plenty to give the lords here the perspective they were sorely lacking. Grinning at the man's defeated look, Lux decided he wouldn't give a king he held no respect towards a valiant end. And as the hammer's head crumpled in the smallest display of his true might, a casual backhand sent the man's head flying across the grounds, the Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, the King of the Andals and the Roiner and the First Men, dying a pitiful death that no songs would be written of. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat requires Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. Subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 12 comments 0 vote. Chapter 45 Conclusion. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Jon Arryn. No, it can't be, Jon murmured, watching as the man he raised like a son fell lifelessly onto the cold hard ground, his head still tumbling off into the distance. With all he'd seen, he'd not had much hope for Robert's victory in the duel, but still, now that the consequences for his king's reckless nature had finally arrived, he couldn't help but look back at everything that led to this heartbreaking conclusion. If only he could have talked some sense into his liege. Maybe this could have ended in peace. Sure, it would have been a tense peace, but at least his foster son would have been alive and well. But those were only his current woes, something that with this King Tenebris's insistence to provoke, he felt this was the only way his son's murderer intended for the day to end. What truly had him contemplating was the near decade that now all seemed in vain. Was helping usurp the throne the best choice he had? Would Robert be peacefully ruling from Storm's End otherwise? Jon felt he'd never get his answers for those questions, but he knew they would haunt him for the rest of his days. Well, that was anticlimactic, King Tenebris spoke, bringing him out of his daze, returning to his raised throne as the oddly dressed girls transformed back into his armor and sword. Now, where were we? The foreign king started, and if not for what he'd just witnessed, the king's tone alone would have had him demanding an answer for the disrespect. But now they had to play by a new set of rules, and looking to his fellow lords, most of whom seemed to be in a similar state of shock and dismay, he didn't believe any would be stepping forward to put their necks on the line. Of course, that was aside from the grinning of Aaron Martell. Not even he could guess what the madman would do given the situation. Please, would you allow us the safe return of his grace's remains before we begin? Jon asked, the king's guard stepping up to the grim task after receiving a nod from the man who'd now be calling the shots for the remainder of this farce of a parley. There, you have your king's body. Shall we finally begin? The king chuckled, making Jon hide a frown, all but the splatters of blood remaining in the clearing. What are your demands? He put forth, resigned at this point. Demands. Have all of you forgotten that this man still holds our families hostage? A baron shouted, apparently over the glee he felt watching the death of his king. Man, do you still consider this being a paltry mortal after all you've seen? A lord from the Westerlands, Leo Lefford, if he wasn't mistaken, scolded. It's fine, I can forgive such a minor affront from someone related through marriage. King Tenebris easily waved off, everyone, including himself, now sending suspicious glances towards the Dornish party. The Martells, hatred of the Baratheons wasn't a fact kept hidden, they could only assume the worst. But hostages, uncle-in-law. You wound me so. I assure you, aside from the 3 extras you so kindly sent to my doors, I don't believe my other guests would be too enthused about leaving my palace and the luxury they've become so accustomed to. The king continued, making the Dornish prince growl at the claim, Mace Tyrell standing to put forth his own opinion before being whacked into silence by his mother. Enough, a baron, we'll first hear what King Tenebris has to say, Doran commanded his unruly brother. But brother, the Red Viper began before being cut off. Enough. Doran's glare had a baron returning to his seat before nodding to the throne, an amused grin on the king's face. You may all think me a tyrant, but my conditions are far from harsh. You will renounce your claim of the north and allow my merchants to go about their business free from tariffs, King Tenebris listed, and Jon was honestly stunned by the modest demands. Those are fair arrangements. Ones I shall not oppose, Tywin stated before he could gather himself, most of the lords seemingly in agreement. Fantastic, I'm glad we could all come to an agreement, King Tenebris smiled, somehow taking the Lannisters' words as if he spoke for them all, not that Jon would comment on the matter. But a baron, I feel like we've got off on the wrong foot, he watched as the pleased king turned to the scowling prince. You'll have to thank your daughter and niece for pestering me enough to give in to their wishes, he continued his speech before Jon blankly stared as a golden rift of sorts formed in the air, a woman he'd never imagined seeing again walking through, a toddler holding her hand tight. Was this man truly a god? Despite his steadfast faith in the 7 who are one, he couldn't deny what was now in front of him. He'd not seen Lyanna since she was young and could have written off the woman at the king's side as nothing more than a northerner of similar appearance. But these two were, without a doubt, Princess Elia and her daughter, Rhaenys. Elia, is that you? A baron's voice trembled as he slowly walked towards his long-lost sister, neither Doran nor King Tenebris raising an objection. It is, brother, Elia agreed, a tear running down her cheek as a baron held her by the shoulders. Happy now? The king casually asked. Where's my nephew? A baron pointedly asked the question most here were likely thinking to themselves, ruffling the hair of his niece, who didn't seem to recognize her uncle. After all, the child would have the strongest claim to the throne. Ask your sister, King Tenebris excused himself from the siblings' reunion. A baron, Aegon was a dragonseed. We only claimed he was ours to keep King Aerys's madness at bay, Elia said after a sigh, her brother's seething glare falling flat. Jon's eyes turned to the small council's master of whisperers, the man's face seeming paler than usual. Did you know of this, Lord Varys? In the end, the mummery wouldn't have meant much to the kingdom at large, but it was still something that the eunuch should have informed them about in all the years he'd served. Varys felt his blood running cold, a noose tightening around his neck as his most important play for placing a Blackfire on the throne became naught but ash. Already, he was planning his escape. He didn't believe for a moment his deceit would go unpunished, and with all that would change after today's events, if there was any chance at all for seeing his ambitions met, Westeros was no longer the place he could freely weave his web. Varys, the hands near his distracted him from his mental preparations, making him realize he'd missed something. Apologies, my lord, I must not have heard what you said, Varys simpered, back to playing his role after the slip-up. I asked if you knew about this, Lord Arryn repeated, and he could see the distrust in the man's look. This is as shocking as it must be for you, my lord, Varys easily lied, but from the simple grunt of acknowledgement he'd received, he knew his days of going trusted were over, not that it mattered much, he'd be gone the moment he could. Lux. Not wishing to watch a grown man cry any longer, Lux looked to the woman seated on his lap, the blonde beauty watching the show like it was a soap opera or something. Are you enjoying yourself, my dear? He asked, one hand moving under her shirt in boredom, enjoying the softness of her midsection. It's quite touching, Val hummed in agreement. I didn't know you could be so kind. Lux rolled his eyes at that. He'd done plenty of good deeds since arriving in this shithole of a world. So much so, he was pretty sure it equaled out all the death and destruction he'd caused. But that wasn't why he currently had the displeasure of watching this tearful reunion. No, that was all because of his two Dornish vixens getting a promise out of him while he was buried to the hilt in Tyenne's tight asshole, Arianne working her wonderful tongue along his sack. He figured it was for the best. They hadn't been too pleased about Cersei, or the deals made with her father. Hopefully this would stop him from having to fuck the frowns off their pretty faces going forward. Damn, keeping a harem at peace was a lot of work. He'd have to thank Bella for being there to keep things running smoothly most of the time. All right, ladies and gentlemen, eager as you might be to continue this lovely get-together, I have much that needs my godly attention. Lux began wrapping things up, descending the temporary throne and fully intent on enjoying the company of his girls as they pampered him after a hard day's work. But as you can see, I can be the generous neighbor, that is, if we can all understand our place. He narrowed his eyes at the sniveling lords before leaving the final step, most of the cowards not even able to meet his gaze. Have you forgotten my daughter and grandchildren? By right, they deserve to rule over the north. Hoster Tully so rudely interrupted his final words that should have concluded this day. I was generous enough allowing your grandchildren their claim over Winterfell. Be thankful that I've decided against adding your paltry lands to my holdings, he threatened, grinning as the old man's face turned red. But you have not, and any land trade with the south must pass through my territory. Hoster gave his own veiled threat, probably not having the balls to outright say he'd act against him. Aye, that's true, and how do you expect I should sustain my lands without collecting tolls on your passing merchants? The man he could easily recognize as Walder Frey thought himself important enough to butt in. It seems your vassal has his own concerns, Lord Tully. I hope you don't mind me settling matters with the Freys first, Lux said, not really asking for an opinion either way. Now, Lord Walder, far be it for me to put a man out of hearth and home. Therefore, I'm open to any ideas you have. He put on a fake smile, the wrinkled lord perking up at how well things seemed to be going. You have children, yes. A betrothal would go a great way towards lowering my fees, the fucker had the audacity to suggest. Lux sighed. He'd been keeping things so amiable this day, but now the weaselly shit just had to go and ruin his mood. Looking at the other lords with a smile still on his handsome face, he noticed even they seemed shocked by the man's courage, and Lux was sure more than a few were hopeful he'd take offense at the late Lord Frey's words. Lux decided he wouldn't disappoint the crowd. Mustering a bit of magic, the twin towers of the crossings formed in a perfect three-dimensional rendering between himself and the southern lords. With travelers, servants, and guards easily spotted moving about, it was made obvious that this wasn't a simple image he'd conjured up. A mighty castle, Lux casually commented. If you were not aware, I only have daughters. A safe home is of course a requirement for any prospective suitors. Worry not, King Tenebris, my walls are impenetrable, Walder boasted, proud of his house's history. As much as I'd like to take your word for it, I trust you'd understand that I'd want to see your claims for myself. After all, the safety of my children is of utmost importance, Lux told the weasel. Yes, family should be cherished. Perhaps we could arrange a visit, Walder agreed, acting as if he were nothing but the most benevolent grandfather. Ah, no need for that. I can easily test your defenses right here and now, Lux chuckled, and the old Frey finally seemed to realize things might not end up the way he was so brazenly expecting them to. Snapping his fingers, black portals speckled the skies above the twins, the demonic creatures that had been making themselves at home in the swamps of the neck descending on the helpless defenders like a flood, and within all but minutes, chaos reigned, black hellfire consuming the stone structures and surrounding forests. He'd been wondering what to do with the demons created after Yaling's massacre of the largest slaver city. Sicking them on the weasel just felt right. No, it can't be. This must be a trick. A mere illusion, Walder almost sobbed, and just like that, Lux was already back to his good mood. Ignoring the old lord after teaching him a lesson, Lux turned to the paramount of the trident. Now, Lord Tully, was there something you wanted to add? He not so kindly asked, deathly silence his only answer. Wonderful, I'm glad we could come to this understanding, Lux said after receiving the response he was going for before jumping back onto Hannibal, ready to return home for some much-needed rest and relaxation. Seraphim Michael. Flying over the Italian countryside, Michael was determined to see the first task given by their new father completed without error. And yes, it was definitely a different father seated upon heaven's throne, something he and his siblings only realized after leaving the awe-striking presence their new lord radiated. He didn't exactly know why their father insisted on acting as if he were the original creator, and perhaps it was something he'd never understand. Nevertheless, the throne and system recognized their new lord, and their only duty was faithfully serving. Shaking himself from the thoughts that held no purpose, Michael quickly arrived at his destination, an isolated church that seemed far too well off for its location. Disguising himself as a common two-winged angel, Michael strolled through the front entrance, an old nun greeting him before falling to her knees after noticing his feathery appendages. Please, sister, there's no need for that. Michael gave the woman a kind smile before getting to the point. Could you lead me to the priest in charge here? I have important matters to discuss. Oh, of course, my lord angel, the sister stammered, ushering him through the lavish halls in a stunned silence. Father Marino, you have a visitor, she called out after knocking on one of the back office's doors, nervously waving him in after receiving a curt acknowledgement. Michael frowned after laying eyes on the portly priest. Without even diving into the priest's mind, he could sense sin and greed wafting off the man's form. He was already beginning to feel like this wouldn't be a pleasant conversation. Ah, an emissary from heaven, how may I be of service, sir? The priest named Marino rubbed his grubby hands together. You can call me Leo, he gave a fake name. And I've come for a girl named Asia Argento. The sin-riddled man froze at those words, making him narrow his eyes. Asia, if you don't mind me asking, what could heaven want with one of our orphans? Marino inquired after recovering. I do mind, Michael replied, hoping to cut off any further nonsense. All right then, I'll take you to our dorms, the priest said after an awkward pause, a frown on his chunky face. Following the man through the church grounds, Michael's face grew dark. The living conditions of the attached orphanage were far from the opulence on display in the main building and offices. And confirming his suspicions, the priest's fidgeting increased as they finally stopped at a room in the furthest corner of the building, the cracked door looking like it might fall off its hinges at any moment, a loud creak sounding as Marino barged in without even knocking. Asia, you have an important guest. This is Sir Leo, how about telling him how well you've been treated? Marino introduced, a blonde little girl seated in her sparsely furnished room looking at the priest in confusion before her eyes went wide after spotting his wings. Lord Angel, Asia squeaked, giving an adorable bow. Michael knelt to the girl's eye level, ruffling the odd strand of hair sticking out with a smile. Young Asia, my father has heard your prayers. You'll have a new home from now on. Really? Wait, father, you mean? The cutie asked, making him laugh lightly. Indeed, it's as you suspect, Michael agreed, happy tears running down her chubby cheeks. Now don't panic. My sister will take good care of you, he told Asia before sending her off in a flash. He'd have loved to talk further with the girl his father felt important enough to send his strongest servant, but he knew he couldn't hold himself back from dealing with the undeserving priest after all he'd seen. Michael didn't want the innocent girl to witness what would come next. Now alone with the sniveling priest, Michael's eyes glowed golden as he tore through the man's being, nearly going ill at what he'd seen. Using young Asia's healing for his own gain wasn't surprising. As much as he'd like it to be different, man's greed couldn't be eradicated, not even in the organization meant to guard against sin and evil. No, it wasn't this unpleasant fact that had him feeling sick, but the unholy dealings the priest had made with the vilest of devils, young and beautiful nuns sold off like cattle. Michael couldn't understand how such wickedness had seeped into the church. And to think precious little Asia could have ended up as a future target if not for his father's wisdom. Michael knew he wasn't an angel of wrath. That title went to his brother Cassiel, but after their new father's arrival, he could already sense the invisible chains binding his actions loosening, his anger soaring for the first time. Your sins are unforgivable. The most I will give you is a swift end, Michael growled, a sort of light piercing the man's chest before he had the chance to grovel. He'd make sure this place was properly cared for in the future, but first he had one last stop to make. His father hadn't mentioned it in their first meeting, but the next day he sent a message telling him to check out a project run by the church that had something to do with holy swords, led by a man named Valpierre Galilei. Michael only prayed his findings wouldn't be as bad as this was. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat requires Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D.